2019 regular board meeting. At this time, we will entertain a motion to move into a period of executive session.
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Agostini.
I move to convene an executive session for the purpose of discussing student appeals and student admission requests into the district's adult education program.
Thank you, Mrs. Agostini. Is there a second? Second. Thank you, Dr. Caution Parker. At this time, we will call the question and cast our votes. Do you need us all to do hand or? Okay. Okay, y'all are really talking right now. You're good. By a vote of 7-0, the motion carries, and we will convene into executive session at this time. Good evening. At this time, we will now reconvene the February 26th regular board meeting of the Richland 2 School Board of Trustees. Back into session, we've been in executive session where we recessed to discuss student appeals and student admission requests into the district's adult education program. At this time, we will move on to item 3, specifically item 3.1, where we'll be favored with our inspirational moment and led in the Pledge of Allegiance by Dr. Helen Grant.
Good evening, Madam Chair, school board members, Dr. Davis, and to our Richland 2 family. Thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity tonight to share the inspirational moment. There's an inspirational speaker and comedian by the name of Michael Jr., and he said, when you know your why, your what becomes more impactful because you're walking towards or in your purpose. So tonight, as we come to the end of Black History Month for 2019, I'd like to share with you some of the reasons why we celebrate Black history. We celebrate Black History Month because it is our privilege as educators to help our students find their pathways to purpose. We celebrate Black History Month because it is our honor as educators to help inspire the future of our students. We celebrate Black History Month because we believe in the core values of learning, character, community, and joy. We celebrate Black History Month because diversity and inclusion is one of the principal practices of our school district in our strategic plan. We celebrate Black history because a proud citizen of the United States of America, my history is America's history. I like the way that author Richard Wright explains it in a quote from a book, 12 Million Black Voices. And here's what he said. We Black folk, our history and our present being are a mirror of all the manifold experiences of America. What we want, what we represent, what we endure is what America is. If we Black folk perish, America will perish. If America has forgotten her past, then let her look into the mirror of our consciousness, and she will see the living past, living in the present, for our memories go back. Look at us and know us, and you will know yourselves, for we are you, looking back at you from the dark mirror of our lives. We celebrate Black history because it is the history of all of us. Will you please stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Dr. Grant, who is our Director of Diversity and the Office of Multicultural Inclusion. We appreciate your inspirational moment. At this time, we will move on to item 4.1, approval of our agenda. If we could get a motion to approve the agenda.
Madam Chair,
Thank you. Mrs. Agostini.
I would like to move to approve the agenda for this evening's meeting, February 26, 2019, and table item 13.1.
Item 13.1 is actually our next, the agenda items, that's the approval of our agenda items for the next meeting. So you want to table the items for the next meeting?
Yes, please, until we have further discussion on policy regarding that.
Is there a second regarding approving tonight's agenda, but tabling the approval of our agenda items for March 13th?
Madam Chair, I'll second for purposes of discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Manning. It's been moved and properly seconded. At this time, is there any discussion? Mr. Manning.
I wasn't planning on it, but why not? So if we table this item permanently, then we revert back to, I guess I'm a little confused as to how we vote on this anyway. So if we vote on it and then we change something, then the superintendent and the board chair can just change it even after the board voted on it within the 24-hour window that we have to notify? Is that how, so the board votes on it, but then the chair can just change it with the superintendent based off policy, right?
The items were placed on, that item was placed on the agenda as a method of helping keeping us in following the policy, where the agenda and the board members have the ability to approve the agenda ahead of time. So a motion could be made once we're looking at the agenda item. If there's an agenda, an item that you want to add to the agenda for March 12th, you would make a motion to add item X to March 12th agenda. The board would then vote to add that item. You can also make a motion to remove an item from the March 12th agenda, and the board would vote to remove that item. That way, the chair or the superintendent chair doesn't have control over completely setting the agenda.
So it just would be.
As of right now, the policy states that the superintendent, along with the chair, will set the agenda. That's the way the policy is now. This was put in place to allow, because the policy also requires that the board votes to approve any future agendas. So we put this in place for the board to be able to vote, because in the past, we never did that.
Madam Chair.
Dr. Caution Parker.
It seems kind of ridiculous to me about removing that policy. We just voted on it in 2017. So why are we going to go change it now? I say leave it alone, leave it on here, keep discussing it until we decide what we're going to do. But we've already voted on it. It's already in place. We just never used it. We need to use it.
Madam Chair.
Dr. Caution Parker. Mrs. Agostini.
I guess I'm just concerned, where does it say that we vote on the board agenda at this board meeting? We vote on it prior to, or at the meeting. It has to be approved. But how do we vote to put an item on agenda? I think it's not clear in the policy.
The policy doesn't state how you vote to put it on the agenda. That's why you make a motion. So once the agenda has been developed, we're bringing it to the board for the board to approve the agenda before we have that board meeting. If there's an item on the agenda on March 12th that a board member does not want to see on that agenda, that board member can make a motion to remove item X from the March 12th agenda. Then the board would vote to remove it. This removes one person driving an agenda. It also removes the superintendent having complete autonomy and authority over the agenda. It puts the responsibility of approving the agenda back on the board, which is in policy, which we were not doing. And so to clear up any issues that we were having regarding the agenda setting and who gets to put what on the agenda, my recommendation was that we follow the policy as written.
I have a follow-up question then. Oops.
Okay.
Then how, so I appreciate that on how to remove something. Now, how do we get something added to the agenda then?
By making a motion to add,
when?
making a motion at the end of the board meeting when we bring up the March 12th, item 13.1. At that time, you can make a motion to add an item to the March 12th agenda because that is the next board meeting.
Could we have that written in policy before we approve it?
It's already in policy that you have to approve the agenda. You don't have a policy on how to make a motion. You can make a motion to add or subtract anything from the agenda. So you don't need a policy to govern adding or subtracting something from an agenda. That's Robert Rules of Order. So when no policy exists, you follow Robert Rules of Order.
That's the policy, right?
Holmes,
Okay, I'm
Dr.
looking at
Holmes, Dr.
policy
Holmes.
B, I'm sorry. B, did you recognize me, Madam Chair? Okay, I'm sorry. I'm looking at policy BEDH, and I'm concerned, as Ms. Ackers, I'm sorry, BEDB. And I'm concerned like Ms. Agostini because I don't see where it says that we can vote to add a policy in. And I think that one thing that we probably should do is put that in the policy so it actually reads that. Because as it stands right now, it does not say that. Vote for it. It doesn't say that in there.
We're not voting to add a policy.
No, but the question was, she asked a question as to how would we add something onto the agenda, which was my concern also. And so I'm agreeing with Ms. Agostini. I think we need to add that into the actual policy that already exists.
I think, Madam Chair, can I follow up on that, if you don't mind? Yeah, thank you. So I don't see in here, Dr. Davis, I'm not trying to be contrary at all, but I don't see in here where it says that we're going to vote on future agendas. I see that it says the board has to vote to approve the agenda, which we do at the beginning of every board meeting prior to us taking any action. And it talks about during that vote what we can do with emergency items and other things pursuant to state law. But I'm not sure that I clearly see in here where it says we're going to vote on the future items in the way that we have it set up right now. Maybe I'm just misunderstanding or not reading that clearly.
Additional questions or comments? Mrs. Agostini?
I just want to say that I concur with Mr. Manning and Dr. Holmes that it's just not clear how we can get something put on the agenda. And I'd like to see that put in our policy.
Well, I want to be clear that it may not be clear on that. My particular comment was on the vote for the future, what we're doing in this meeting today. I don't see where it's delineated in the policy that has to occur.
If I may take a point of privilege just to refresh the policy for the board consideration, answering the question of how you, according to board policy as of today, voted on, issued on August of 2017, the superintendent, in cooperation with the board chair, will prepare the agenda for all meetings. The agenda will include items the board will address in performing its duties as the governing body of the school district in accordance with board policy. The agenda will include references to the board policies where appropriate. Items of business may be suggested by board members, staff members, or the public to be considered for placement on the agenda. An item must be within the scope of the board's duties, must be timely, and must be appropriate for consideration. The written request, which we were not doing, which I've asked and provided for you, the written request for electronic or paper must be received a minimum of 3 business days prior to the desired meeting for it to be reviewed for the agenda. The superintendent and the board chair will decide whether or not to include requested items. The final agenda must be approved by the board. And that's the policy. That's paragraph 1 and 2 of the policy.
Right. Madam Chair.
Mr. Manning.
I guess maybe there's some interpretation here. I read the final agenda approved by the board as what we have always done at the beginning of every meeting, which is the final agenda going into the meeting, not the one for, not today for something that's going to happen 2 weeks from now.
I agree, Mr. Manning, but what that was placed on there because there was dissension amongst how we get items on the agenda. So this allowed the board to review the agenda ahead of time to make the recommendations and suggestions of things they want to see on the future agenda in public session, and then the board can vote on if they want to add those agenda items, because what we had, and based on conversation from the last board meeting, if one board member says, I want to see X on the agenda, but that's not the consensus of the board, then the response is, no one's putting what I want to see on the agenda. Well, the consensus of the board is not asking for those things. So my attempt was to put onus back on the board to vote and decide on what you want to see on the future agenda items. So we added that to the previous agenda, the current agenda for future agenda items, and this gives you an opportunity to say, I would like to see a discussion or a presentation on this. And then someone would make a motion to add that. That motion would be second, and then you vote. Then it will go on the agenda for the March 12th board meeting, and the superintendent has no authority to take that item off or no discretion at that time to decide what he or she wants to put on the agenda.
So, Madam Chair,
Mr. Manning.
I just want to make sure I'm still recognized. But the idea is it's not written in policy, that last part. We did that to try to get consensus from the board. That I guess my issue is that once we vote on it, you say, well, the superintendent can't remove something. What if you need to remove something, or the board chair, or add something because of some last minute issue? Then you altering either of y'all, the folks in those roles altering the agenda, what does that do at that time? Is that okay, or is it not, or how do we decide that? Or
if I need to remove something, or something needs to be removed from the agenda, then we'll ask for the agenda to be amended at the beginning of the board meeting when we're in
the next board meeting. Okay.
In public session at 5:30, we will come in and say we want to approve we want to ask that this agenda be amended. You will vote to amend the agenda to remove whatever item needs to be removed.
But we can't. Well, we can remove, but we can't add to.
Right.
Because of the 24-hour notice.
Yeah, but we've never added to at the last minute before.
We never?
Since my tenure.
Okay.
I mean,
I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm just really making sure we don't paint ourselves in a corner. I'm not trying to be difficult. It's all right. We have a motion in a second, so we can either approve or deny what that item being tabled. If we table it, then we just don't do that for the next meeting, I guess.
If you table an item, you have to set a time when you will come back and pick that item up off the table. Unless you table it indefinitely, which would then reverts back to the policy that's already set, which is why we address this issue. So because that was the concern, was how do we get items on the agenda? So we created a process to allow that to be discussed. If we table it and revert back to what it was to begin with.
Can we table it until 2022 when my term's over?
Dr. Elkins Johnson.
Let me just ask the question, Dr. Davis, to make sure I'm clear on something. When we get down to number 10 for old business action requested, I just had a word change. Is that where I should wait, or is this time to discuss that now?
Under old business action, you can discuss it then. You can bring it up then, Dr. Elkins. It won't alter the agenda at all.
Okay, so my only question is, if we go back to the second paragraph where it says the superintendent and the board chairman,
Which paragraph are you talking about, Dr.?
Second paragraph for policy BEDB. And just that paragraph that talks about the superintendent and the board chairman will decide whether or not to include requested items. Can we, and I think I asked for this before, can it indicate the superintendent and the majority of the board will decide? Or will that put us out of order, or?
At that time, when we get to that item, you can make the request. Yes, you can make the request to modify the policy. We have it on here for your discussion.
Okay, that's what
for your discussion today.
Okay.
Your question doesn't alter the agenda, so you're fine.
So I can hold off until 10. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Madam Chair.
Any other questions? Mr. Shad.
As I read BE, just for the benefit of my colleagues and the public, as I read BEDB with regard to the second paragraph that Dr. Davis referenced, which we are currently under now. Apparently we've not been following, but we're trying to do that now with this attempt. What I understand is, and I'm looking at the middle in terms of it needs to be a timely request to add. The decision is still made by the superintendent and board chair, but the final agenda must be approved by the board. As I understand it, moving forward, and specifically for the March 12th agenda, we are going to approve that today. So because the final agenda has to be set for the public to get it 24 hours before March 12th. So I understand Mr. Manning thinking that the final agenda is when we vote on it at the beginning of the agenda, but we're talking about the future agenda, March 12th, will be voted upon as I think it's 13.1. So if the vote carries for the agenda, additions or not, then that will be approved. Then the board has its input by voting on this agenda. So it starts, as I understand it, with the superintendent and the board chairman meeting, taking any written requests that were provided at least 3 business days prior to that desired meeting. The desired meeting is March 12th. After it goes through the board chair and the superintendent, then it comes up for a final vote by the board, in this case at the previous meeting, which would be tonight. That's my understanding. I don't know if that helps. I don't know if that my interpretation now follows with Mr. Manning or not.
The superintendent is making creating the agenda for you to review, to vote on, to either add or delete items. These are items based on feedback I got from board members of what items you want to see on the agenda. So what we need to do first and foremost is we need to follow, I'm asking that we follow the policy by submitting the agenda items in writing within a timely manner so that those items can be considered for the agenda. If those are items that you have requested have not been considered, a second avenue for a board member to get an item on the agenda would then be to make a motion at the in a current meeting like today to add the item that they recommended. Then the majority of the board can then vote on to either pull that motion on the agenda or not approve that motion on the agenda. Again, it takes that authority out of the superintendent's hand, which was the problem, which when we were discussing this, we weren't getting any type of, we don't want to do that, so we put this on there to make that happen so board members can see items on the agenda that they want. Then that agenda is approved. If anything needs to be modified, we would ask that it be modified, and then you will come in the next board meeting. At 4.1 on March 13th, at the March board meeting, you will have item 4.1. That'll be the final approval of the March 13th agenda. So it's you're approving the items to be on the agenda. Then you'll have the final approval at that actual board meeting on March 13th. Or March 12th, or whatever the date is.
So, Madam Chair, so essentially,
Mr. Shad.
if we vote in 13.1, it's actually not a final agenda. It's still just a proposed agenda that will go out to the public prior to, and then we will finalize that at the beginning of the meeting. So, first of all, is that correct?
That's correct, and that's consistent with what we're doing now. We send the agenda out on Thursday, and we still come to the board meeting on Tuesday and vote to approve the agenda at 4.1. So nothing has changed. I've only added one piece into the agenda to get a board member an opportunity to add or subtract anything from my recommendations of the agenda, but that requires the support of the board, which doesn't allow one person to put anything on the agenda or take anything off the agenda that they like. And it does not allow the superintendent to completely control putting items on the agenda and not putting items on the agenda. It makes us all responsible for approving the agenda. So that's what that was for.
And where's this motion that you're talking about? Where's that written? The motion that says any board member can make a motion, and then depending on the majority of the board or whatever the board says, then it will move forward.
In board policy, there is no, Robert's Rules of Order covers how to make a motion to put something on the agenda item or take something off an agenda item. There's no policy that states that you make a motion to add something to an agenda or take something off. Like you can make a motion for point of privilege or point of information. You can make a motion to suspend the agenda. That's not in the policy. That's just Robert's Rules of Order for how to conduct a public meeting.
So I'm going to repeat it then. It's our policy is silent on it, but where it's silent, Robert Rules covers allowing any board member to make a motion to add to the future agenda, and if it motion carries, then that will change the agenda.
Correct.
Thank you.
Further discussion from board members?
I am going to ask this question.
Dr. Holmes.
On our agenda at 10.6, that is the actual policy that we will be discussing later on tonight. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, then I'll hold my question to then.
Answer questions? If not, board members, there's a motion on the floor to approve tonight's agenda, but table item 13.1. We will call for the question and cast our votes at this time.
Madam Chair, apparently I talked too long and it kicked me out. Oh, wait a minute, it came back.
You voted, Dr. Holmes. Yeah, fine. Okay. Who are you waiting for? By a vote of 2 to 5, the motion fails.
Madam Chair,
Can we get Mr. Shadd?
I move that we approve the agenda for this board meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Shadd. Is there a second? Thank you, Dr. Caution Parker. If there is no discussion, we will cast our votes at this time. Does everyone have a pop-up? Mine popped up quickly. Yes? You're waiting for him? Okay. Do you want to just do it by hand? Okay. Do you have everyone else? Okay. Thank you. By a vote of 6 to 1, the motion to approve our agenda passes. Next, we will move on to item 5.1, special recognitions. Dr. Davis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, members of the board, we have Ms. Libby Ruth, our Chief for Communications, coming before us this evening to share a very special recognition. Ms. Ruth.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. And if I could ask you to come up front with the certificate, and I'm going to ask Board Member Dr. Elkins Johnson to come forward as well. Once technology gets figured out. Congratulations to Dr. Elkins Johnson for reaching level 6, which is the highest level in the Boardmanship Institute, sponsored by the South Carolina School Boards Association. She was honored with a plaque at the recent School Board Association annual meeting, and we were able to, that was just this weekend, we were able to get a picture hot off the presses. The Boardmanship Institute offers year-round training focused on leadership skills for board members on state and national educational issues. The Institute helps board members develop skills, stay abreast of education issues, and attend workshops focused on school law, advocacy, and legislation. The Boardmanship Institute's 6 levels of recommendation are based on points accrued annually. Board members that achieve level 6 earn at least 300 points within a 5-year period and successfully completed a written test. And this is a level that not everyone in the state board members get, so it is quite an accomplishment. So congratulations, and I'm also the photographer tonight. So while everybody's clapping, thank y'all, and that's all for tonight.
Moving on to item 6, approval of our consent agenda. We could get a motion at this time?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Manning.
I make a motion to approve the consent agenda for the February 26, 2019 meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Manning. Is there a second? Second. Thank you, Dr. Caution Parker. It's been moved and properly seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we will call for the question and cast our votes at this time. By a vote of 7-0, the motion carries. Next, we'll have item 7, which is public participation. All of the persons who address the board for public participation are reminded that there is a 3-minute limit to speak. Please refrain from addressing any specific names, any students, teachers, schools, or any one specific name. We want you to discuss issues. And please don't share your address or the address of anyone else during your public comments. The first person we have is Dennis Rabin. Mr. Rabin?
Distinguished board members, Madam Chair, Dr. Davis, good evening.
Good evening.
First, thank you for service to our community. On February 8th, I emailed you a letter regarding the current state of our school board. I was unable to attend the following week's school board meeting due to an engagement out of state. I did watch the board meeting on YouTube, and I applaud your stamina. I was pleased to see and hear that the letter was read at the meeting and disappointed that it was characterized as an attempt to malign Madam Chairwoman. The letter was in no way meant to denigrate or disparage anyone, but rather to clarify that character and accountability are just as important as GPAs and SATs. How do you hold your superintendent accountable when you cannot hold your fellow board members accountable? Yes, Madam Chairwoman, the superintendent is the leader of our school district, but you are elected to hold him accountable, and clearly you're either unwilling or unable to hold yourself accountable. While the students in our district should be allowed to withhold paying their fees until Madam Chairwoman pays her fines, my daughter was dress coded recently, and the school district is generously offering detention to hold her accountable. Dr. Davis, are we okay to ignore that detention requirement until Madam Chairwoman pays her fines? I believe your 4 squares of success are learning, character, community, and joy. And as core value statements go, I absolutely love it. But if we're going to ignore the character requirement for our board, perhaps we should make it a 3-legged stool. The rest of the board doesn't get a pass. While you were debating the finer points of the technical interpretation of cause versus just cause, you completely ignored that the bigger issue here is what kind of example are we setting for our students, teachers, and administrators. In a county so rife with corruption and mismanagement, you have the opportunity to rise above and say, enough. Where's the courage in the room? Dr. Davis, I remember you displaying amazing courage 10 or so years ago in this school district. Maybe you could give the board a lesson on that courage and accountability. Madam Chairwoman, I'm sure you feel you've been lectured enough, but clearly the lecturing has had no effect on your willingness to accept accountability and act in a responsible manner. Actions matter. The lack of filing on time was not a singular incident. Had you accepted responsibility the first time, we wouldn't be talking about it today. If you had accepted responsibility and paid your fines upon the second notice, we would have all forgotten about it by now. Unfortunately, we continue to talk around the issue instead of standing up to our responsibilities. There is no mob mentality. This wasn't a single mistake that someone accepted responsibility for. This was a series of mistakes that someone refuses to accept responsibility for. Kicking the can down the road is simply another way of refusing to hold one another accountable. Madam Chairwoman, if you're earnest in the declarations you have made, then volunteer to step down from the chair position until such time as the matter is legally and financially settled. That would be honorable and clearly signal to our district, our community, and our county that you fully accept responsibility. Making a mistake is forgivable. Ignoring that mistake and the responsibility to rectify.
Thank you, Mr. Raven. Your time has expired, but we'd be happy to see any written comments you'd like to share that you didn't get a chance to read. Thank you. Ms. Meisner.
I'm sorry, I'm
Ron.
on the agenda as number 3. I have a picture of the agenda sign-in, so I'm number 3.
Doesn't.
So we signed in, and I was on the, I can show you my picture.
It's your turn to speak, Mrs. Meisner. Do you not wish to speak right now, Ms. Meisner?
Fine. No, I'm ready.
Okay.
I just wanted to make the point that you guys are manipulating the schedule as...
Your time, but the time has begun.
No, I don't see the timer yet, Madam Chairman. Okay. 2 meetings ago, I spoke to request that board member and chair Amelia McKee resign and return the money she received from the students' parents that she's supposed to serve. For clarification, as I read the state ethics law, no one can take the oath of office or assume official duties without having an economic statement of economic interest on file. As such, I requested Ms. McKee to resign and return the public funds that she received when she was ineligible for service. But before I could speak, my position in the speaking was changed from number 7 to number 3, as it is tonight. While this seems like an innocuous change, it certainly changed the flow of rebuke to allow supporters of Ms. McKee to be before and after, which I think was an intentional manipulation of the schedule for personal benefit. After the meeting, I attempted to echo Dr. Monica Elkins Johnson's concern that the agenda was being monopolized by the superintendent and board chair. I do have a picture of both sign-in sheets. After the meeting, several people supporting Ms. McKee very verbally attacked me and assaulted me on several occasions. In fact, some of the people seemed to have private information that the school district holds about my family. Other members had preloaded videos asking why I was attacking Chair McKee publicly. Other elected officials said that they were invited and were sent here to get both sides of the story. This group, in my opinion, was dispatched to get a reaction and to silence any opposition to public criticism or the board chair. I apparently was not the only victim that night, and other people did not respond as silently as me. In any event, last week I was here at the beginning of the meeting. However, the meeting sign-in sheet, in my opinion, was removed prematurely. You've heard another member of the community tonight ask for you to resign the board. Ms. McKee, I asked you to resign the entire position. You kept a person who had done exactly what they needed to do to be on this board from being here. But not only that, you had notice. You had a full hearing notice, and we're here to look at other board members' actions. I can tell you the night that I was attacked, I personally wanted to punch the lady in the nose. Thank goodness I did not do that. However, these people that think that they're going to silence us, they will not silence us. And you need to take responsibility by leaving your position and leaving the board. And you should do so before the last board meeting so that the people that legitimately should have been elected can take their post at our district. Thank you, and thank you for your service, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Ms. Meisner. Mr. Gary Dennis.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
I'm Gary Dennis, a realtor. a 20-year Air Force veteran, a parent of 2 wonderful children here at Richland, too. As a realtor, you must adhere to a strict code of conduct and ethics. The same applied to me when I was in the military, so I'm no stranger to it. From the past meetings, I can tell you that most of this board does not understand ethics, consequences, and how to move forward from them. Every meeting, members of this board keep bringing up how their name is getting dragged through mud. Well, if you would have followed the rules and regulations by doing your due diligence in researching everything required by you while running for the board, you might not be in these shoes. At the last board meeting, policy revision BD organization of the board failed. This really did not sit well with me because this has been on the books for at least 2 weeks, and none of you even raised a finger to fix the policy before it was brought up for a vote. I recently had a parent that was looking for a home here in Richland too, because of the reputation of this district. After recent events from the chair, I got a call, and the parent said, "Please stop looking for a home here in Richland too and focus on the Lexington-Chapin area instead." I asked why, even though I knew what the parent was going to say. The parent stated because the school board is the laughingstock of South Carolina. So we've lost one great family. How many more are we going to lose because of actions of the board? We have a member on the board who owes around $51,000 for ethics fines. The member might have filed the required disclosures, but that was done past a deadline, and consequences come with that failure. Now, there have been no payments made to take care of these fines. This is seen in the public spotlight as not owning your problems. I do feel like the school district is being misrepresented correctly by the board members. We hold our students to strict rules and regulations. So as parents, we must hold our school board to strict ethics, rules, and regulations. A school board should be the leaders for the district. Instead, it seems more like a comic strip to me. A leader's true power comes from leading by example, not by damaging the reputation of a school district. The members of the board that's sitting in front of me are elected leaders for this district. Keyword elected. I call on the chair to resign over the public issues that face her, to save face in the public eye for this district. Nothing is gained and everything is lost by staying on the board. Do the right thing and step down from the board so we can move forward past these problems that happened while serving and running from the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dennis. At this time, we'll move on to legislative update, item 8.1. Mr. Shad.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Certainly.
Just wanted to highlight that there's been a lot of activity that has been occurring. I spoke last time regarding the House bill, which is to reform our educational system as we know it. There's still opportunity to speak to your legislators about it from whatever position you hold. My understanding is that it has now come out of subcommittee and it is expected to go to the House floor. It came out of the House. So it's expected to go to the House floor this week, so that could be either tomorrow or Thursday. And again, there's still opportunity for you all to share your concerns with it. There have been a number of amendments to the original bill, and so as amended, it is up for a vote on the House on tomorrow or Thursday. Thank you.
Any questions or comments? Mr. Manning.
Yeah, I just wanted to make the comment. I think that, as we look to all the K through 12 legislation that's out there and our board and where we stand as a board, if there was some way that we could maybe come to an agreement on sort of a legislative agenda or thought on where we stand on some of these legislative items, I would like for us to consider a process for that. You and I talked a little bit about that previously, and I think it's probably past time for this board to take a stance as the 5th largest district in the state.
I appreciate that, Mr. Manning. We have talked about that previously, and that's one of the things that we wanted to discuss on Saturday, but we've had to cancel the board retreat for Saturday because we won't have a quorum, but I agree that we do need to
Madam Chair,
take an official stance with regard to that. Mr. Manning.
Is there any way we could maybe have staff provide some input on a few things that the board could look at. I don't know if Dr. Davis is comfortable with that, but just ideas that we could maybe work through and as a board decide whether that's where we land on those issues.
I'll defer to Dr. Davis on that. I know that he did provide us a summary. I'm sorry, I'll get you, Dr. I know that he did provide us a summry early on that we've gone through. I'm sorry, go ahead.
The summary was an attempt to give you a condensed version of what was out there for the focus of discussion. However, I would be more than happy to give my position and opinion along with a consensus of administration from the leadership level. I think it's pretty clear what the teacher organizations have kind of come out with and what they've stated. I have shared my position publicly with our state superintendent. I have shared some positions with our Richland County delegation as well, representatives and senators, along with our superintendent's group at SCASA has a position as well. They are meeting tomorrow at 2 o'clock with Senator Lucas to discuss SCASA's position from the superintendent's standpoint, and we're having our Midlands roundtable tomorrow as well to meet prior to that meeting to share the Midlands superintendent's position as it relates. And I can give you a synopsis of those things to share with our board. I'll be absolutely.
Dr. Elkins-Johnson. I'm sorry, are you done, Mr. Manning?
I just said thank you.
Okay. Dr.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Davis.
Elkins-Johnson.
And just to add to that, the Black Caucus of school board members, we met also over the weekend, and we're waiting to schedule a new meeting also to get some pointers together that we'd like to share with the legislators also. So you guys can just bear with us and give us a few more weeks. We plan to get together the South Carolina Black Caucus of school board members to devise a plan as well.
Thank you, Dr. Elkins-Johnson. Any further questions or comments with regard to Mr. Shadd's report? Mr. Shadd, thank you. And I echo Mr. Davis's sentiment. I know Mr. Manning and I have talked for a long time about the school board taking an official position on big ticket items. We can't do every single issue that the legislature debates with regard to education, but things that are hot button items we have talked about, I guess, for a few years now, making sure that the school board has like an official position. We talk to legislators, we value those relationships, and we are very thankful that the Richland County, we can only account for them. The legislature, of course, is statewide, but the Richland County Caucus is extremely pro-education, and they've been very supportive to Richland 1 and Richland 2, our sister district here. And I know that we have shared Dr. Davis's talking points with the board so that the relationships that you have, you can share with other legislators. But as Mr. Shadd says, communication from the public is everything. Communication from our parents is everything. Communication from our school board members regarding these items are critical. So I echo your sentiments, and I thank you, Dr. Davis, for taking the time to try to give some cliff notes early on. We appreciate that. Thank you. Are there any further questions or concerns for Mr. Shadd? Thank you for your report, Mr. Shadd, and for reiterating what you told us last time. We appreciate that. At this time, we will move on to item 9.1, student appeals. If we could receive a motion with regard to student appeals.
Madam Chair.
Dr. Elkins-Johnson.
I would like for us to pull student number 1. No, that's incorrect. That is so incorrect. If we can go block student number 1 and student number 5. Student number 1 and student number 5. That would be deny the appeal. I'm going to pull number 2. Student number 3, Blythewood Academy for the remainder of the school year. Student number 4, Blythewood Academy with Laredac. And then we're going to pull student number 6. Let me make a correction on student number 4, Blythewood Academy with Loredak for the remainder of the school year. Thank you, Dr. Davis. And I can go back over that, Tamika, if you need me to. Okay.
When it does pop up, Dr. Elkins Johnson, if you could just verify the accuracy before we cast our votes. I'm sorry? Gotcha. So assuming we're going to do the student appeals, do you want to go into the addendum, or do you want to do that separate
No,
motion?
that will be separate.
Okay, I'm sorry. Is there a second for Dr. Elkins Johnson? Thank you, Mr. Shad. It's been moved and properly seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we will call for the question and cast our votes. If we can just wait just a second for Dr. Elkins to verify the accuracy of the motion, that'd be great.
That's correct.
Thank you, Dr. Elkins Johnson. If we could cast our votes at this time. By a vote of 7-0, the motion carries. At this time, we'll entertain a motion with regard to students number 2 and students number 6. Dr. Elkins Johnson.
Student number 2, Blythewood Academy for the remainder of the school year.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Agostini. It's been moved and properly seconded. At this time, we'll call for the question and cast our votes. Can you send mine again, Mrs. Sherman? Thank you. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
It's the same one to vote again. Because she asked to reset it.
By a vote of 5-2, the motion carries. At this time, we'll accept a motion with regard to student 6.
Student number 6, Blythewood Academy for the remainder of the school year.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Shad. It's been moved and properly seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we will call for the question and cast our votes. By a vote of 4-3, the motion carries. At this time, we will move on to, we'll entertain a motion with regard to student appeals, the addendum portion.
I'd like to make a motion for students number 2, 5, 6, 8, and 9, Blythewood Academy for the remainder of the school year.
I'm sorry, Dr. Can you repeat the numbers you just read? The student you just read?
Students number 2, 5, 6, 8, and 9, Blythewood Academy for the remainder of the school year.
Thank you, Dr. Elkins-Johnson. Is there a second?
Second.
Mrs. Agostini, it's been moved and properly seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we'll call for the question and cast our votes. Dr. Elkins-Johnson, if you could verify the motion before we cast our votes.
That's correct.
Thank you, Dr. Elkins-Johnson. This time we'll indicate our votes electronically. By a vote of 7-0, the motion carries.
Student number 1, I'm going to pull. If we can take a look at student number 3 and 4, my motion is to deny the appeal.
Thank you, Dr. Elkins-Johnson. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Agostini. It's been moved and properly seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we will call for the question and indicate our votes at this time.
That's correct.
Thank you, Dr. Elkins-Johnson. By a vote of 7-0, the motion carries. Dr. Elkins-Johnson, if you want to.
Student number 7, I'd like to make an motion for Blythewood Academy with Loredak for the remainder of the school year.
Thank you, Dr. Elkins-Johnson. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Shadd. It's been moved and properly seconded. Is there any discussion at this time? Hearing none, we'll call for the question and indicate our votes electronically. Accurate, Dr. Elkins-Johnson?
Yes.
Thank you. By a vote of 7-0, the motion carries. Student number 1.
Student number 1, I'd like to make a motion, Blythewood Academy for the remainder of the school year.
Thank you, Dr. Elkins-Johnson. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Shadd. It's been moved and properly seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we'll indicate our votes electronically at this time. By a vote of 3-4, the motion fails. Is there another motion?
Madam
Is there another
Chair,
motion? Mrs. Agostini?
I move to deny the appeal.
Is there a second?
Second.
The motion has been made and properly seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we'll electronically indicate our votes at this time. By a vote of 4 to 3, the motion carries. Let me also get a motion with regard to item 9.2, adult education request for student to be admitted into the adult education program. Is there a motion?
Madam Chair,
Dr. Elkins-Johnson.
I'd like to make a motion that we allow the student to attend the adult education program.
Thank you, Dr. Elkins-Johnson. Is there a second?
I emphatically second.
Thank you, Mr. Manning. It's been moved and properly seconded. Is there any discussion at this time? Hearing none, we will cast our votes electronically. And it's actually plural. I think I said student request. It's actually plural. Mrs. Sherman, if you will just allow a friendly amendment, would that be okay to make it plural, Dr. Elkins-Johnson? Without objection? Thank you. It makes plural. It's more than one student. I misspoke and said student. It's actually students. So I'm just asking if Dr. Elkins-Johnson will allow for an S to be added to request.
Madam Chair, I'm going to take my voting machine with me and go get more coffee. I'll be right back.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Okay. By a vote of 7 to 0, the motion carries. At this time, we have entered an item of old business action requested, starting with item 10.1. Dr. Davis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, members of the board, we have before you Mr. Will Anderson, who will share with you policy proposal revisions to our transportation, to bus scheduling and routing, also the bus safety program, as well as student conduct on buses and extracurricular activity buses. Mr. Anderson.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. Policy EEA is presented to your approval. That was presented 2 weeks ago at the last board meeting. No changes were made from the proposal from last time.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Are there any questions or?
Madam Chair.
Actually, it's old business action. Go ahead.
I move to approve the revision to policy revision EEA regarding transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Shadd. I forgot it's under action requested. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Holmes. It's been moved and properly seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we will call question and indicate our votes electronically at this time. By a vote of 7 to 0, the motion carries. Moving on to item 10.2, Dr. Davis.
Mr. Anderson.
Following policy EEAC, bus scheduling and routing, once again, no changes from the submission 2 weeks ago.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Shadd.
I move that we approve the revision to policy EEAC regarding bus scheduling and routing.
Thank you, Mr. Shadd. Is there a second? Second. Mrs. Agostini, it's been moved and properly seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we will indicate our votes electronically at this time. By a vote of 7 to 0, the motion carries. Moving on to item 10.3, Dr. Davis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, members of the board, we're presenting the policy revisions to EEAE bus safety program. Mr. Anderson, we answer any questions, should there be some? If there are any, I'm sorry.
Are there any questions? If not, is there a motion?
Madam Chair.
Mr. Shadd.
I move that we approve the revision. I'm sorry. Yes, it's a new action, but I move that we approve EEAE bus safety program.
Thank you, Mr. Shad. Is there a second? Second. Mrs. Agostini, it's been moved and properly seconded. Is there any discussion?
Madam Chair.
Mr. Shad.
Mr. Anderson, I'm looking at page 2 of this. It looks like there was, let's see, with regard to alcohol and drug testing, but the top of that page, the proposal was to have a blood alcohol concentration of 0.04 or greater, and it looks like that's, if this is approved, that will be struck, and then there will be language that says reporting for or remaining on duty while under the influence of alcohol. Who determines whether this person is under the influence of alcohol if we don't have a measure like a 0.04?
Well, we do blood tests, urine samples. If, for example, currently if a bus driver gets in a wreck, we automatically schedule a urine sample or blood test to determine what their blood alcohol level is, or if they're on any other types of drugs. So that's a standard operating procedure that we do any time a driver is in any type of incident. So if we have evidence or reasonable belief that this driver is impaired, then we will do the necessary test, and they have to go, and it's immediately done.
So the policy doesn't say that, but that's what you all actually do if there's an accident that occurs?
Yes, sir. That's our standard operating procedure. Yes, sir.
Regardless of who's at fault?
Correct.
Okay.
That's correct. Yes, sir.
Okay. And lastly, if the driver, this policy doesn't state if the driver refuses, but if they refuse, do you all take that as the position that they must be positive if they refuse the test?
If they refuse, they'll be put on immediate administrative leave and then upon further investigation, and we work with that through our HR department.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Mr. Shad, are there any other questions or concerns for Mr. Anderson at this time? Hearing none. There's a motion on the floor that has been properly seconded. We've had a period of discussion, and at this time we'll call for the question and cast our votes. By a vote of 7-0, the motion carries. Moving right along to item 10.4, Dr. Davis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, members of the board, we brought before you at the last board meeting policy EEAEC. We're now bringing this policy back for a second reading and your approval of its revisions as stated. And Mr. Anderson stands ready to answer any questions if there are any.
Is there a motion at this time?
Madam Chair.
Mr. Shad.
I move that we approve policy revision EEAEC regarding student conduct on buses.
Thank you, Mr. Shad. Is there a second? Second. Mrs. Agostini, it's been moved and properly seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we will call the question and cast our votes electronically at this time. By a vote of 7-0, the motion carries. Item 10.5, Dr. Davis.
Madam Chair, members of the board, we bring before you EEAFA for your approval. Extracurricular activity buses. Mr. Anderson stands ready to answer any questions if there are any.
Is there a motion? Mr. Shad.
I move that we approve the policy revision EEAFA regarding extracurricular activity buses.
Thank you, Mr. Shad. Is there a second? Second. Thank you, Dr. Holmes. It's been moved and properly seconded. Is there any discussion to be had? Hearing none, we'll move into a period of the question and cast our votes electronically. By a vote of 7-0, the motion carries. Item 10.6, Dr. Davis.
Madam Chair, members of the board, we bring before you for second reading policy BEDB, board agenda. You can see the recommended changes noted in green, changes suggested by district administration are highlighted in yellow. This is the second reading of this policy.
Is there a motion?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Shad.
I move that we approve the policy revision BEDB regarding board agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Shad. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Caution Parker. It's been moved and properly seconded. Is there any discussion?
Madam Chair,
Dr. Elkins Johnson.
I think this is the time when I need to speak on it. I would just like to go back to the second paragraph and the last line where it says the superintendent and board chairman would decide whether or not to include requested items. I would like to make a friendly amendment to that to say that the superintendent and the majority of the board will decide whether or not to include requested items.
Thank you, Dr. Elkins Johnson. And correct me if I'm wrong, with the new procedure that we have now where everybody has input, would that not be the majority of the board in your understanding?
I'd like to see it in writing. I think it would just help. I'm sorry. I think it would help if it's something indicated in writing instead of a practice.
Thank you, Dr. Elkins Johnson.
Mr. Manning had his on first.
Mr. Manning, did you have a question or a comment?
No.
I'll do. Madam Chair,
Mrs. Agostini?
I'd like to say that I'd like to concur with Dr. Elkins Johnson and have it in writing so that there's not a question of policy versus practice.
Any other questions or comments with regard to this policy? Dr. Holmes?
I also concur. I would like to see it in writing as a policy as opposed to practice.
Questions or concerns with regard to
I do have one more question. So, sorry, just Dr. Davis for a little bit of clarity. So some of the items that go on there, we have like things like student activities. There's some things that aren't sort of key, big ticket items. So how does that fold into the final agenda and the majority of the board approving what goes on the agenda and policy versus a practice? Practice would let us pick those big items and let the chair and the superintendent still pick some of those other issues. I just want to make sure we're not, again, painting ourselves in a corner.
To be quite honest, I don't know. I can't say how it would work. We will have to figure it out as we're doing it because we've never done it this way before. So I don't know what items the board would want to vote on or vote off of an agenda. I don't know what sections the board would want to add items to an agenda or not add items to an agenda. So I can't really say. It'll be a suggestion or we'll have to come up with an administrative rule on how the agenda would be set and approved by the majority of the board. So it'll take 4 votes to approve the agenda.
So I guess that's my fear. If we go to put it in policy versus the practice of doing it, the practice would allow us to sort of pick those, the kind of big ticket items, still allow the board chair and superintendent to pick the sort of totality of the agenda. If I know I may not be super clear, but I think the board knows what I'm talking about, some of the student focus and some of those other things that are more soft agenda items. I'm a little bit nervous on what that does for that.
Thank you, Mr. Manning. Dr. Elkins Johnson?
Yes. If I'm understanding this correctly, and help me, Dr. Davis.
Yes, ma'am.
This is only if we want to add something, not the regular agenda that we always have. This is only if we want to add or remove something, correctly?
That would need to be stated specifically because as it's stated now, it is the superintendent and the board chair will decide whether or not to include requested items. So the current language that is being suggested will be that the superintendent and the majority of the board would need to decide whether or not to include requested items. So whatever items would be submitted, those items would then be sent to the board as a whole for the board to approve the requested items in a whole. So every board member would submit what he or she would like to see on the agenda, and then the board would approve, the majority of the board would approve those requested items.
But that's only the outside items, not what we currently have on the agenda. That's
all
standard.
items. Yes, ma'am.
items.
Some items are standard, like
Right.
call to order, but you don't have to have inspirational moment on an agenda. That's not a requirement to have an inspirational moment. Some items, you don't have to have a legislative update. That's an added item, so that would
Well, I guess I need to be clear, only additional items, not standard items, because standard items, we know we must do that at every board meeting. So
the standard items is just the topic, like 9 voted on executive session items, but there may be different executive session items that need to be added. So it may be a voting on an item that's related to the purchase of land. That's not on here this time, but it may be on there the next time. The majority of the board would have to approve setting the agenda to add that item. I would have to let the board know that this needs to be on the agenda and get everyone's approval to add that item to the agenda.
I think, thank you for that clarification. I think I want to remove my motion, but what I want to do is still table policy BEDB, because I think we need more clarification and an opportunity to talk more about this policy for clarity. So I like to make a motion that we just table.
Well, we've got one on the floor. We got a motion on the floor right now we have to act on.
No,
Yeah, the original motion.
The original motion?
The original
motion. Yeah, I think yours was a recommendation to make an addendum. Gotcha. Dr. Holmes?
I think what I'm concerned about, here's where I'm at with that. I'm not talking about the standard items that would normally be on an agenda. That's not what we're focusing on. We don't need to have a whole board approve standard items for an agenda. I think my basic concern here was we wanted to be, as board members, we wanted to be able to add items to the agenda and take a possible vote at the end of the meeting, and those agenda items that carry the majority of the vote will be added on for the next meeting. This is not to talk about changing the whole focus of the standard items. This is having the ability to add on to the agenda and take a vote so the board can decide which specific items they'd like to see as a totality be added as a point of clarity.
Dr. Holmes, if I may respond, that's why I added section 13.1. So in section 13.1, you will, in 12.1, you will see what the agenda item is for the upcoming board meeting on March 12th. On section 13.1, you can make a motion to add any item to that agenda, and then that motion would be second and voted on by the entire board.
I'd like to I understand, thank you, Dr. Davis, for that, but again, I would like to see that actually written within the policy.
Madam Chair, can we
Mr. Manning.
Can we vote on the current motion that's on the table, and if it fails, then we can come back and and do whatever we want to with it, but I'd like to vote on what was put forward.
Without further questions or comments at this time, we will call the question and vote on the motion as stated.
And that's the original
The original motion is to vote on the policy as it's already been amended, as it has been amended. Does everyone have a pop-up as it stands? As it was given, it's already been amended as it was given to us. Does every board member have a pop-up? By a vote of 4-3, the motion carries. Next on the agenda is, I'm sorry, let me catch up. Which section are we? Next on the agenda is section 11, new business, no action requested, starting with 11.1. Well, this whole section, Dr. Davis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, members of the board, Mr. Anderson stands before you this evening to share with you policies revisions to the following policy, and we'll take them one at a time. FA, facility goals, then we'll go to FB, facilities planning. followed by FEE, site acquisition, and then also following that will be FF, naming facilities. Mr. Anderson.
Good evening, and thank you for allowing me to bring these policies to you tonight for first reading. The first policy, Policy FA, is Facility Development Goals, Priority Objectives. This is an existing policy. The only change that we are recommending are to add the first bullet item, which is safety and security features that protect students, staff, parents, and community members. Other than that, the policy is as it's currently stated, which basically says that we will build very great, safe, secure, awesome buildings.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Are there any questions or comments from board members? Hearing none, we'll move right along. Dr. Davis, well,
I'll go ahead. Next section is Policy FB, Facilities Planning. Once again, this is an existing policy which talks about what we will do in terms of the criteria used to develop our facilities. The only revision is the last paragraph, which states all construction, improvement, and renovation of district property will comply with standards and specifications set forth in the South Carolina Department of Education's South Carolina School Facilities and Planning and Construction Guide.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Are there any questions or comments for Mr. Anderson? Hearing none, we'll move right along.
The next policy is Policy FEE, Site Acquisition. This is, once again, an existing policy which allows the board and the administration to buy property. The minor changes says that we will designate funds into a separate account and that we'll use those funds to approve the acquisition as approved by the board, and then we will use general obligation bonds when necessary, and then we'll attain those funds for further school site acquisition if and when necessary. Any questions?
Just a point of clarification, Mr. Anderson. I presume that the reason the insertions are there is because there won't always necessarily be a time to do that, but you're asking for the authority when necessary, but it won't always be necessary. I presume it's for clarification.
That's correct. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments for Mr. Anderson at this time? Hearing none, moving right along. Thank you.
I think this is my last policy. Yes, it is. Policy FF, naming facilities. Basically, we're taking out the title of new facilities, adding the section for new school buildings, but the policy is the same. Basically, how the procedures for how we will name a facility and those things that for the rules and policy things to name a facility. Any questions?
Dr. Elkins Johnson.
I have two questions. One, now I see it's been a practice and not policy, because when I was on the board, when we had to name another school, we allowed 3 school board members to be on the committee, and the policy states only 1 school board member. So I would love to change that to 3 instead of 1 to give us an opportunity to take part in that like we've done before. And then also, it states below that the committee will submit 1 name to the board for consideration. I would love to see that indicate submitting 2 names to allow us an opportunity to see the top 2 names that the community have come up with.
Mr. Dr. Elkins Johnson, in what section would you say the name, one name?
Just at the top where it says new school building, that second bullet says 1 school board member.
Yes, ma'am, I got that. And your second point about the one.
The second point, it says the same section. If you come down, it says yes. Hold on a second.
No, she said names. She said names.
No, it's the committee would submit 1 name to the board for consideration, and I'd love to see that say 2 names.
Okay, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Madam Chair.
As a point, may I ask something?
Yeah, go ahead.
As a point of clarification, so would you want to see 2 names and then the board vote on those 2, or let them see the ones that they've selected and just give you the top 2?
No, the board looks at the top 2 that the committee have come up with.
Thank you, Dr. Elkins Johnson. Mr. Manning?
Yeah, I guess procedurally on the 2 names to sort of follow up on that, how would that work? So we get 2 names and then whichever board member's the first one to make a motion for the name they like, we vote on. I mean, so I guess I think that could get a little messy. I mean, I don't mind seeing the other names, but I feel like having the final name presented to the board, especially if we got 3 board members already involved, like it seems like that's, I don't know, I would just ask us to reconsider the 2, because process-wise, that could get a little messy. My belief on that.
Thank you, Mr. Manning.
And I'm open
Dr.
to-
Holmes, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Dr. Holmes.
I'd like to see the 3 numbers for being on the panel, but whatever name the committee decides, I would be fine with that. But I think that 3 board members should be on that panel as opposed to just 1.
Thank you, Dr. Holmes. Are there any other questions? Dr. Nicholson-Johnson?
And I'm okay with just the 1 name. I can be open on that, as long as we can allow at least 3 board members.
Thank you, Dr. Nicholson-Johnson. Any more questions or comments? Mr. Shad, I'm
Madam
sorry,
Chair,
into your light.
I would like to see, and I'm just going to change it just a little bit, but I would like to see up to 3 board members. Not necessarily required by policy that we have 3 board members serve, but just up to.
Thank you, Mr. Shad. Is there any disagreement on that point?
No, I'll agree with that. Thank you, Mr. Shad.
Okay.
Absolutely, Doc.
Any other questions or comments from board members? Bless you, Mr. Anderson. Thank you. And let me just say, just for giving people their flowers, I know that the administration puts a lot of time, effort, and research into these policies. They don't just appear here magically. I know we have, recommended changes by the South Carolina School Board Association, but I know that there's a lot of research that goes in this so that you can answer our questions when we come forth. And I just want to acknowledge the hard work that a lot of people in this room do, and we don't take it for granted. We appreciate it. Next. Dr. Davis.
Madam Chair, members of the board, we have before you this evening Dr. Harry Miley, who's prepared to provide you with the second quarter financial report.
Thank you. Members of the board, you have in your docket, in your packet, the second quarterly financial statement. The good news is we're a little bit further into the year, so we get a little bit better picture. As we've talked about it, as the year goes on, revenues and expenditures are not actually in sync in the first half of the year or so, but we're getting closer. One of the things that I wanted to point out tonight, one is everything is in pretty good shape. For instance, our revenues are slightly ahead of the last 5-year average. We've collected about 38.6% of our total general fund revenues to date. The last 5-year average is just under that, about 37.5. So the good news is we're a little slightly ahead. We still have a long way to go, but we're slightly ahead in terms of our revenues to date. The other part of the good news to me is that our expenditures are slightly below the 5-year average. As you see in the next page, our expenditures to date are about 43.7% of our total budget allocated, and the 5-year average is right at 45%. So the good news is we're on target. There's no outlying expenditure or revenue category, and revenues are slightly ahead of it, our budget projections in 5-year history, and our expenditures are slightly below expectations and our 5-year pattern. You also have a report of our EIA funds. As you know, we get a substantial number of EIA funds, are budgeted about $22 million this year. Those come across over the course of the year. So far, we've received about $7.8 million and spent about $5.7 million of those EIA funds, and expect to get the remainder of those funds throughout the year. Our special revenue funds on the next page, we're expecting about $33.8 million this year. As you see, these are slower coming in. They're not out of ordinary, but that's to be expected. We've received about $6.3 million to date, and we've spent almost $9 million so far. Again, I take this opportunity to mention that having a fund balance of an adequate fund balance helps us fund operations, for instance, when we have more revenues, less revenue stream than our expenditures require. So that helps us make it through those times when revenues are lagging. Board accounts are in line with history and our current capital project budgets outstanding. This is not the bond funds that we were the referendum from November 2018. This is from previous 8% bond funds. And I'll be glad to answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Dr. Miley. Are there questions or comments from board members at this time? Dr. Elkins-Johnson?
Yes, I have just a few questions. If we can go to page 4 for number 311, professional development. Is that the monies that we distribute to all of the schools, or is that just within the district office?
Okay,
the revenue budget
for EIA funds, 311?
Yes, number 311. For professional development, we still have $255,280.
Nancy, thank you.
So it's based on teachers. Okay, thank you. If we can look at number 358 on that same page.
Yes.
Just clarification, it just says reading and indicates 72,783. No, I see a different one for reading coaches.
Yes.
This just says reading.
That's just the EIA funds that we get for reading, and it's not
so is it the
coaches.
Reading programs in elementary schools or for the materials? Can you come to the mic, if you don't mind, please? There's one. Okay. Oh, perfect.
Those are reading funds that we get for the state, and they go to elementary and middle.
So is that all the elementary schools and middle, or?
It is shared among all elementary and middle schools.
Based on a number of classes or students, or?
I think Mr. Newton is over that, and he can better address how it is allocated.
It's allocated based on need. For example, we purchase Reading A to Z for the entire district using those funds. And additionally, we look at data and look at needs of schools to decide where the money's going to go.
Okay. On the next page, page 5, number 267, it says improving teacher quality. Someone can explain that. Improving teacher quality.
Nancy again. And I apologize again.
Oh, no, that's okay. Just
if we had some of these questions ahead of time, we'd be more than happy to have them more formally organized.
Yes.
But can you help me answer that?
Yes, I can. Those are funds that we use for teacher retention and with our teacher induction program.
I thought I saw a different number for that. Okay. So improving teacher quality is for teacher retention?
It is for teacher retention.
Okay. I'll talk with you about that later. And number 832. 832 is the Rural Recruitment Initiative. I know I did get a handout, but I haven't had a chance to look at it because I received it today. If you could speak more on the Rural Recruitment Initiative. And are we recruiting teachers from the rural school area, or what is that? I know what the fund is, but how do we use it in Richland too?
That is information that I can provide. I know I provided it in a board brief in December, and I will provide that information to Dr. Davis to share with the board.
Right, and I think that's the same one that I asked that we do a presentation on instead of the board docket. But I'd love to know more about it. So how are we using the Rural Recruitment Initiative funds?
Again, if I can provide information to Dr. Davis and allow him to share that information with the entire board, I can do that. I can provide that information.
Yes, or if Dr. Davis, someone can speak to that now, because if we're using the funds, I know someone should be able to tell me how we're using that.
Well, right now, we've, out of the $666,000, we've only used $25,000. So
right.
we haven't used a whole lot.
Well, that's why I asked the question, because I see so much money here, and we haven't used it, and the year is almost over. So I want to know, how do we use it?
Part of it is, number one, if I'm not mistaken, it's a grant, and we got the funds because of the retention rate of the school district across the state who had a certain number of students, a certain percent of teachers who may have left or had a certain percent of retention got these funds, could apply for these funds. We did not get these funds at the beginning of the fiscal year, so it's not a clear. They weren't ready July 1, so these funds. So it would look like it's a little off.
Correct. We got it in October, November.
Yeah. So to say that.
Okay, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's what I needed to know.
So the rural retention fund, the rural retention money is being used to recruit and retain teachers as well. So it's a different set of revenues that we are allowed to have to go out and recruit teachers. It's also allowed us to pay special education teachers, for example, a bonus. For recruitment, I want to say fee, a recruitment stipend, for lack of better words. We've done is also allowed us to travel to different places across the country to try to recruit teachers from different states. It's allowed us to try to attract teachers who are in those critical need areas. So we put our focus in math and science, special education. And I believe we also put an emphasis on recruiting those teachers in world language, if I'm not mistaken. But it's those high turnover positions and hard to fill positions as far as recruitment. It also allows us to do some professional development. I think it also gives us an opportunity to do some advertisement. So for some of the advertisements you see for our recruitment fairs, it gives us an opportunity to use that money for that as well, which saves us from using general fund money to do those same things in order to be competitive as to recruit and retain teachers.
Okay, the other question.
We'll probably have beyond 6/30/2019 to spend those funds.
That's the next question I was going to ask, if we can carry over those funds for next school year.
Yes.
Okay, that was my concern, that we had so much money and it's still there. Like, why aren't we using this money? Okay, so we just received it, so that makes a whole lot of sense. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Additional questions or comments from board members? If not, thank you, Dr. Miley.
Thank you. You asked me, a previous board meeting, to give you an update on the conference center revenues. If you, maybe 2 or 3, 4 board meetings ago. We've put together some materials for your review, and I'd like to go over those tonight. One of the things I wanted to remind everybody is that this has been a difficult learning curve, because this entire operation upstairs is new to us. I think we've done a great job, but we're still learning from it. And one of the things I think you'll see from some of these numbers tonight is that it's being used a great deal for district functions. District people, district schools, district departments, the community. We're using this facility a great deal. I think some of us at one time originally thought, well, we would have a lot more outside use in the building than internal use. And what we found is that we are using this building a whole lot. But primarily us, meaning the district, departments, schools, and various and communities. So what our mission, the mission of the conference center is to offset conference center expenses by providing a premier venue and premier service for conferences, weddings, trade shows, and business meetings. That is, the normal business operations for all of our internal operations is hopefully we can offset some of those costs, because there are costs. When we have a meeting, there are costs for custodial, there are costs for security, there are costs for people to come in and set up the facility, there are costs to clean the carpet and after functions. So there are costs incurred whether we're renting the facility to outside users or not. So we try to achieve this by providing our guests and clients with premier customer service. We exceed expectations in a manner that secures future business. We try to promote the conference center in a manner consistent with R2 standards, and we try to maintain high ethical standards by being fiscally sound and giving back to the community. When we say giving back to the community, we think of things like renting it below market rates. I was just at a conference in Myrtle Beach, in Hilton Head. Some of you may have been there. And we needed a projector, and rates there are about twice the rates at our facility here when somebody needs some AV equipment or something at a facility like that where they're renting and having a conference. We try to do that below market rates. I have the clicker, thank you. You've told me that before. Events in calendar year 2018. We opened the upstairs at about the 1st January 2017, but it was a relatively slow opening, soft opening as they call them. We haven't really still to date have not done a great deal of advertising. Of those, during the calendar year 18, we had 46 events that generated about $93,000. That's a lot. We think that was more than 17. But if you look at the bottom, we had 478 events in the calendar year. We're closed on Sundays. That's 52 days out of the year we're closed. We're closed during spring break. We're closed a week of Christmas. So we had 478 events in about less than 300 days. We think that's really great utilization of this facility. We had 136 district events. When we say district events, and what we try to do is we've adopted a practice of saying, oh, if we've got a paying client, we'll move a department meeting to a different site or a different date so that we don't run away a paying client. Those district events, we don't want to reschedule those. Those are important events like Monday's celebration of Black History Month, State of the District events back in the fall, recruiting events and things like that. So we don't want to change some of those. We had 39 events for board meetings. We had 16 community events, 11 school events, and 230 internal district department events for a total of 478 events. So when we look at the facility, again, perhaps naively, at least I was thinking 2 years ago, oh, we're going to rent this out to the private sector a lot. Well, I never envisioned that we would be using the building internally to the point of roughly 90% of the events, and having multiple events every day throughout the course of the year is a great deal of use, and I think a great benefit to the district. But it has changed my thinking, at least, about, okay, in terms of the dynamics of the financial arrangements for this facility. In calendar year 2019, looking ahead, it's only the 26th of February, but we have 30 events already booked for the year. We think that's a very good indication of the attractiveness of the 30 outside events, 30 outside events. We got a whole lot more events booked internally, but we have 30 events for outside with potential revenue of $56,000, and it's only February. So we think that we have a great deal of potential of increasing that. Calendar year 2020, we're already a year and a half ahead of ourselves, and we have 7 events booked for 2020. These are the types of events that we've come to realize. I know Jackie knew this coming in. Some of us didn't understand this. But see, these large events like weddings aren't booked 30 days ahead of time. They're booked 18 months ahead of time. And so we now have 7 events with the potential revenue of $35,000, 18 months before the year even starts, for 3 weddings, 3 holiday parties, and 1 corporate event. And with that, I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Malley. Other questions or comments from board members? Dr. Elkins-Johnson.
Dr. Malley, thank you for that report. I noticed you stated back in 2018 we had 16 events, and in 2019 already we had 30. What do you think contributed to that? Changing the amount that we charge the community, or are we advertising more?
Let me make sure I have your question. And state your question one more time, please.
In 2018, we only had 16 community events. Yes. Already for 2019, we have 30.
No, that's 30 outside paying clients.
Right.
We
had 16 in 2018, correct?
No, we had 46.
46.
Paying clients in 2018.
Okay.
That's the very top number on, let me go back. I apologize.
Maybe I wrote
Right here, we had 46 events. Those are paying outside clients.
okay.
Yes, we did have 16 community events, but those were, and I think Libby may come and correct some of the things I may be saying.
No, I have it
Okay,
now. I wrote
okay,
down 16.
okay.
It should have been 46.
Yes.
So you've answered my
You're
question.
asking what was the increase?
Well, no, we're fine now.
Okay.
She thought it had declined.
I thought it was 16.
Okay.
Yes, so
Okay.
we're okay. Thank
Okay.
you.
Yes.
Board members, Mrs. Agostini?
Want to go? Okay, thank you. Is there a marketing or a business plan for this facility?
The marketing and communications plan has been really for when we receive information, people who are interested in the venue. Because of the limited staff, we're not aggressively marketing it. But we are doing some small amounts because that costs money. So it's based out of the communications and marketing plan for the district. And so we have some advertising, but we are not doing a lot of advertising. Right now, I'd say the events are coming basically a lot of word of mouth, and the community events, when people come, we bring the community in and they see the venue, and then they're interested in it.
Do we ever send anyone out to the local businesses, some of the bigger companies, to actually make sales calls versus just bringing them in, but actually approaching people like Blue Cross and Blue Shield and letting them know of the facilities that we have?
Right. We do some of that. Jackie does some of that. Ms. Lee does some of that. Unfortunately, we have a very skeleton staff. So when we have 478 events, there's almost an event every day in this venue. And Jackie, Ms. Lee, and Ms. Waymer, our AV person, are pretty much the staff for seeing the events happen, make sure they meet the standards that we want, and Ms. Lee is also trying to sell it. But we actually had a Blue Cross event, Blue Cross Blue Shield event. She's using a lot of her contacts that she knows through her previous work. We also have events when we go to the Rotary. We've had the Rotary in, so we've done things where we brought Chamber of Commerce as well. But again, as Dr. Miley said, we've done this very slowly, because one thing we don't want to do is overpromise, and we know we have a small staff, and we want to make sure when we can sell, we can deliver what we sell.
Last year, I know that we did, I thought it was an $8,000 media drop over at the movie theater.
Yes.
Did you track the business and how much business you got out of that?
Pretty much those weddings that you see. Some of those weddings were from that. That was, we dropped it, when we started doing that was right after Christmas, and we saw a lot of brides come in. Some of that, when we first did it, was, and Ms. Lee probably has numbers on, because she would ask people as they come in where they saw it. So I can get that for you. I don't have them in front of me right now, but I can check with her to see if she has that. But I know she was very excited when the first bride came in, because she saw it that day, and the next day, it was the first day it ran, and she was in here. So yes.
Okay, because I'd be interested to see how many weddings or events we booked based on that. And then my final question is, you talked about the expenses of the setting up and, the changing out and the cleaning of the carpet. Do we charge our own departments within the district to use the facility for that same setup and cleanup and everything else?
No, we don't, because it's all coming out of, right now, that would just be moving money from one account in general fund to another account in general fund. So that would be a lot of extra accounting for just taking the money out of one pot and using it to pay for another. So the money's covered in the budget in the general fund budget for expenses right now.
I would love to do that, but
well, I guess my concern is when you bring in a different group and you're charging them for service solutions, and let's just say that they're here on a normal weekday when they're working here for an outside group, you're charging the outside group to utilize them, but you're not. So it makes it sound like you need to hire additional people to put it together when you've already got the service solution people here to put the facility together.
Not necessarily. The service solutions people that are here to maintain the building, and Mr. Anderson can help with this too, are a separate staff most of the time from when we have big events and we have to bring them in. So we're bringing in additional staff, correct, Mr. Anderson?
So like you're bringing in temporary employees then to come in and
No, our contract with Service Solutions is we have a dedicated staff here at the entire R2I2 building. We also have a team we call the Tiger Team. It's a team of 4 staff members with Service Solutions, and their job is to provide support throughout the entire district. So on a day when there's not an event, this Tiger Team may be out pressure washing a school, or they're really hitting those things that need to be done. But primarily what happens is that Tiger Team is working here at the conference center helping with the setup and takedown of events. Also, the issue is like every issue, we're trying, Service Solutions is trying their best to fully staff, and unfortunately they have not been fully staffed. So there's our Tiger Team of 4 up until recently was a Tiger Team of 1. So anyway, I don't know if that really answered your question, but we have 9 people for the building, which is all their normal custodial duties, and which is during our normal business hours, and then we will then bring in more people to help those events because the building still has to be cleaned. So we'll bring in the Tiger Team, we'll bring in from another school if it's after hours to cover these events, but still those same people still have to trash, mop, sweep the entire 230,000 square feet of building.
All right. At the end of the calendar year, I would love to see, the balance sheet or the financials in a comparison from the last couple of years.
Be glad to.
The school calendar year. Thank you.
Mr. Shadd.
Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Ms. Roof, you might need to stay up.
Okay.
Maybe. Thank you for providing this to us. And I don't know if my colleagues share this, but I kind of feel blindsided, though, that it wasn't part of the agenda. It wasn't given to us in advance so that we could properly prepare questions. But I appreciate you giving this to us because you're right, we did make this request several.
And I'm sorry, that I was crunching numbers, and we did it for the calendar year, January through December, because in the event world, that is how they operate. So Ms. Lee helped educate us that, when she worked in other venues, when you look at their year, based on how their events run and how they typically other venues would raise their prices, that happened. So we did a January to December. So we didn't have the final numbers until January. So between what else we were doing, he was crunching the finance numbers, and I was trying to do a real good study of the actual events, because we have them in there. When you pull a report, it's multiple things. So that's totally my fault. We were crunching numbers until today. So I apologize. Absolutely.
If it was Harry, then I'll be a little bit more upset. Now, while I appreciate you all giving us this information, as we know, the board agreed to change the policy to allow for liquor. And I know that I asked during that period of time, and I thought I sent enough signals that at least I wanted to see, and I think some other board members did too, wanted to see some comparison as to what type of revenue we had, because what we were told in your presentation before was you expect that the revenues would increase once we become more attractive to private folks by allowing the liquor to come into this facility. So I'm not even sure how many months ago we're in it now, but since that policy's come into play, I would have expected in this presentation that we just got to show some comparison to see where we are. And I'll wait for your response, or I'll wait for your response and I got some else with the numbers.
My opinion that it's too early. As you see some of those events that I think Jackie would say are booking because of the change in policy are those long lead time events such as the weddings and holiday parties. And so I think that given another 12 months, I think we can see that. The policy was changed, I believe, in June
of 18.
Right, that's what I understand. Some of those events are long lead time events.
Right.
And so I wasn't expecting a great deal of influx of events that take long lead time. So I think, in fact, our 30 bookings for 2019 are an indication of that. We'll find out. We're only 2 months into the year. And I think our 7 bookings for 2020, which is we had not had those kinds of long-term 2-year-out bookings before. So I think that will be an indication. I believe right now the numbers, it's just a little too early to see that kind of impact because, again, those kind of events take long lead times.
Okay, and thank you. So let's go to the numbers then. And I do appreciate you saying that it's still early. I do want to remind the public and, of course, the board that in the policy that was approved, we would revisit it every single year. So while I appreciate that it's still early, there's an opportunity for us to revisit it in June of this year to see the impact. So we definitely would like to have those numbers in comparison because it would have then been a full year come June. So I'm specifically looking to see how much financial impact we have. But you can't really compare and say this is for sure because we're allowing liquor. I guess, well, they have to let us know that they're bringing liquor in, so you would then be able to compare that to the ones from years prior. But as I understand it, Dr. Miley, for 2018, we had 46 private events at $92,895. So that means we averaged about an event a week, with some of them being closed, of course. By my reading, that is, by my calculations, that's an average of a little over $2,000, $2,019 per event. Now, we are early in 2019, those 30, and you're projecting it for $56,000. So that's about $1,866. So it's a little bit lower than last year when, at least for half of the year, we didn't have liquor involved, but we do. And then, of course, you're projecting out for 2020, which is very promising because we're not even in that year. We're already at 7, and that's averaging about $5,000 per event. And of course, 2020 won't be here for a while. So I'm encouraged that the numbers are trending up, but I am alarmed that it has actually, from an average standpoint, has gone down from 18 to at least this first quarter, about to be a first quarter of 2019. But my hope is that you all will do your your premier best to justify us, well, the board, agreeing to this liquor situation, which was supposed to make this attractive to the private folks.
This is kind of my hypothesis on that. When we first started looking at that and asked y'all to revisit that policy, we had probably 7 or more, I can't remember exactly. There were some big events, and they were weddings, conferences, some other events like that I think came to us planning to book during this 2019 year, and when they found out we didn't serve, and this is totally, but that was part of it. Those events that we lost when we talked about it during last year were actually for this current year. So that was one of the things we saw those events go.
How many was that?
I think if I looked was 14.
So your hypothesis is that because 14 people said in 2019, because you don't have a liquor policy, we're going to go somewhere else, and that spawned us the policy revision?
When we came to y'all, we had talked. At that time we had an internal caterer, which that did not work out. Right. We don't have that. So they had some clients who wanted to use the venue who could not, and so that was one thing. But then we were also meeting with brides and other businesses and corporations, and that was one thing that when they asked, they said no. So they wouldn't have the event here. So I think when you see the decline a little bit, that was because we had turned some events away that would have happened in this past year. So that's what I'm.
Let me interject just for a point of clarification. When the initial policy was written, it was written in the intent to review the policy annually. So when the policy was originally passed, it was passed to only allow beer and wine, with the understanding that we would revisit the policy every year. we were asked to provide information regarding the rentals at that time and what did we think the number of businesses that we thought we had lost as a result of not having liquor. But we did not make the decision to ask the board to revisit the liquor policy as a result of losing potential business. That was already established, and when we came back with the report, we were asked to give an update on whether or not we thought we were losing business as a result of not having liquor included in the policy versus beer and wine.
Okay, that your intent might have been to clarify, but I think you confused me. We also asked the opposite of that, how much business was lost, how much business was gained because we did not allow liquor into this school building. And I don't know if the answer was necessarily satisfactory. I don't think you all could probably really project some folks saying, oh yes, because you don't have liquor here, we want to do it here. So I know profit is what we are looking for. Well, let me not say profit. We're looking for revenue. We probably will never actually make profit given all of the expenses that we have. But this is a wonderful facility for folks to check out and to be a part of. But the last thing that I wanted to ask is, I know you said that, and I forgot could you go to the very first slide? It was at the end, and giving back to the community. What does that mean in terms of private folks? Are you discounting certain things for those private folks as well? And is that just, and whose discretion is that in terms of giving back to the community? I know you might not be charging market rate, right, but are you charging market rate to some and then not to others?
One of the things you see, the 16 community events, we have joint events with the Richland County Library. So that's the Halloween celebration that's very popular. The Richland County Library has up to 6 events here that they can do at no cost. We have small groups come in. We have a schedule that helps us define what our discounts are. Schools don't pay hardly anything. If they are charging for an event, they pay some. So there is a defined kind of a discount rate. If they're a nonprofit, Richland County has used it for free. So it's not the private full sector, private sector, for-profit companies. It's the small organizations being able to allow them to use it at a much deeper discounted rate.
So what I would love to have is, if you can quantify that, had this event going on and it was someone in the private sector asking for this, what amount would have been charged, and so therefore you can tell the public and us what that amount is, those 16 community events, to say, we gave in kind, we gave this to the community, what that number is. That would be very helpful.
We did actually, It is such a large number, we actually looked at all the non-charging events that the district holds, departmental and others, for the use of the building, and said, okay, what if we were charging for that room rental? What if we were charging for security and custodial? And it was about $500,000.
I'm sorry, could you say it again so everybody can hear?
It was about $500,000. Okay. So again, and that helped me rethink this process in terms of this is for the community, for the district, for professional development, for a variety of things that serve our district and the public and our community. And profit may not be there, but yes, we want to enhance those revenues as much as we can to help offset those costs that it does cost us to provide those in-district and community events at a lower cost. We do have a schedule of fee waivers that we provide. We don't provide fee waivers to private for-profit companies, but for educationally related companies, school-related activities, we do provide those discounts, and some are as much as 75 to 100%. So, yes, sir.
Could you all just make sure y'all have that somewhere in the public domain so folks can see that? That would be wonderful, because it clearly shows that we are great partners as it relates to assisting the community in getting their things out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Additional questions or comments from board members? If not, if you just share your report with us, that'd be great. Thank you for providing it, though. Sure. We appreciate that. Thanks. Thank you so much. Moving on to item 11.6, capital improvement update. Dr. Davis.
Madam Chair, members of the board, Mr. Anderson will provide you with the capital improvement update.
Good evening again. I'm back.
Good evening.
We have promised you guys that we will come every meeting, every second meeting of the month to provide a update on our Richland 2 bond projects. Before I get started, just want to thank you all again for your support. Thank the community for the support of the bond. Thank the staff, John Clayton and Carla Bullard in our office, our finance staff, Dr. Harry Miley, Dr. Dolores Coleman, Shelley Allen, Joan Morano for their work, and the communications staff, Libby Roof, and especially Megan Moore, which I'll point out later. I wanted to run through some of these things real quickly and then answer any questions you guys have. So the work to date, the things we have done so far, creation of timeline and cash flow needs, we actually did that before the bond had passed. We wanted to know before the bond had passed what our timeline would be, what would our cash flow needs be, how would this look? And that timeline continues to change as we start hiring people and things start moving, but they're not moving too much. But at least we could have an idea of what our cash flow needs would be in year 1, year 2, year 3, et cetera. We still are very hopeful. We continue to meet with our financial advisors, with Dr. Miley's staff on a very low cash flow need in year 1, and then kind of the a mountain look, the ebb and flow of our needs throughout the next 5 to 8 years. We've also have gone our phase 1 architect selection. Once again, we put out an RFP before the bond had passed in November the 6th, but we put a big asterisk on there that's saying that if the bond did not pass, this RFP was not valid. And so we did an RFP. We had a committee to select architectural firms for our phase 1 projects, which include Forest Lake Elementary, Bethel Hanbury, E.O. Wright, et cetera. We had 18 firms submit proposals. We interviewed 11 and we selected 10 firms. 2 of those firms are minority firms, and 6 of those firms are firms that have never worked in Richland 2 before. From them, we then selected construction management at risk firms. That RFP also was posted before the bond, but it also had a big asterisk about if it passed. At your last board meeting, you approved the contracts for those firms. We had 12 firms submit proposals. We interviewed 8 firms, and we selected 6 firms for construction management at risk. Those were for 10 projects that included the Forest Lake Rebuild, Center for Knowledge North, the Performing Arts Centers, stadiums, et cetera. So as of today, we have architects hired for 18 projects, and we have construction management firms hired for 10 projects. We've also have hired 2 women-owned architect firms to do, it's called a definite delivery contract, meaning that we can use those firms as needed. They're working on all of our front entrances and smaller roofing and HVAC projects that were not part of those larger projects. So they began work February 1st, and we have those hired as well. We've also I've gone through and we had the bond resolution, which was passed back in your January meeting, authorizing the school district to borrow the $468 million. And right now we're in the design stage of many projects. Right now, currently, we have 33 active projects in the design phase. So we are up and running. The bond was passed November 6th. It's February 26th, and we have 33 active projects. So our kudos to our team, have been working extremely hard, and so we're very excited about that. We are working on the secure entrances, portable reduction, which is CFK North, replacement schools, performing arts, and stadiums. So all of these are currently in design phase. We actually have one that's finished, so you can see on the picture there, that's North Springs Elementary School. We were able to go ahead and get a secure entrance there. We're still finishing the technology work in terms of the buzzer system when you come in the front door, but now there's no way you can go straight through into North Springs Elementary School. So one down, many more to go, but we're excited about the progress we're making. In addition, the work that's currently ongoing is the safety and security upgrades to all of our schools, to our camera system. We're putting together an RFP to update all of our camera systems, are still installing our key card access. We've got work that will begin soon on fencing around our securing our perimeter. We are continuously, as we've been doing for many years, our windows, making those more shatter resistant and bullet resistant, and continue to do our hardware. We have put an RFP out and have already ordered 14 buses that we hope to have by the start of by the first of the school year. These are additional buses, and so we're excited about having those. And then our IT department is working on implementing their needs for our bond referendum. So how do we intend to keep you all updated? This is really some of the exciting work that we want to share with the public and share with you all as well. So today, this website went live, and so everything I've spoken about, you're going to get a much more, all the details and information on our website. So if you go to our Richland 2 homepage, you can go to the it's about Richland 2 on the home page, and it says Pathway to Premier Facilities. And when you get to this, you'll get to this page here that basically shows Pathway to Premier Facilities. And then you got all the previous information that led up to the bond referendum. So you can see all the work we did before the bond referendum, but you can see the little arrow that says bond projects. So if you click there, it'll take you to these pages here. So you can click on the bond projects, which has elementary school, middle school, high school, district projects, etc. And so here you'll come to the elementary school bond projects, and you'll see all the schools that are elementary projects. You can see them in different phases with the banners, would be either planning, design, construction, or complete as it continues to go on. And if you see there, you can click on CFK North, an example. It gives you information about the project, the scope of work, gives you where the project status is located, the percentage, tells you some key information, the total, estimated total, the architect, and the contractor. And so some very tremendous work done by Ms. Megan Moore in the communications office and the communications team, and then Mr. John Clayton, who's helped get this information accurate and up to date. We've got a good process in place for getting this information accurate, and it will be updated on a monthly basis as in coinciding with our bond update meetings to keep the public informed and the board and everyone informed. And with that, I will answer any questions you have. Dr. Molly and others are here to help answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Questions or concerns from board members? I guess that means you've done a very good job of keeping us updated, and you have, behind closed doors, done a very good job of keeping us updated in the process, and we appreciate the hard work you're doing.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the support.
Bless you. I appreciate it. Next, we will move on to item 11.7. Dr. Davis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, members of the board, we have before you Dr. Helen Grant, and I believe Mr. Patrick Kelly will provide you with a report on culturally relevant training in Richland School District 2.
Good evening, Madam Chair. Good evening.
Teaching cohort here in Richland District 2. I've worked with Mr. Patrick Kelly, who has been directly involved with the cohort, and we're just going to take you through a little bit of information and share through video some of the work that's being done with our group. So, as we think about culturally relevant strategies in teaching, we divided this up into 3 questions we'll share with you tonight. And that first, why take this approach to professional learning for culturally relevant teaching? And the reason for that is that relationships are key. And we know that this approach will provide strategies for our staff to build positive relationships with our students, and all of that to improve the teaching and learning process. Also, because in our strategic plan, we have the universal goals of culture and environment that support talent and achievement, and culturally relevant strategies can make all of that work. And also, this approach provides tangible plans of action to help us towards the goals that we set for talent and achievement in our district.
We're also doing this because of, as Dr. Grant said, because of relationships. As Dr. James Comer once stated, there's no significant learning in the absence of significant relationship, and we believe that's true of our students. And it's impossible for a teacher to build significant relationships with a student without knowing who they are, where they're from, what their culture is, what their values are, what their background is. And we know in a district that is blessed with the rich diversity that we have in Richland, too, that it's critically important that we provide teachers with those tools and strategies to be able to engage in culturally relevant teaching practices. And we also know that teachers that experience success in the classroom are more likely to stay in the profession. So we want to try to equip our teachers with the skills and mindsets that will allow them to find long-term success and fulfillment in the teaching profession. Research by the Learning Policy Institute found that teacher turnover rates are 70% higher for teachers in schools serving the largest concentrations of students of color. Now, LPI's report can't definitively state why that's occurring, but we believe that given the rich diversity in our classrooms, it's essential to give teachers the strategies that they need to meet the diverse needs of our students. The culturally relevant teaching training that we're providing is being facilitated by Dr. Gloria Boutte from the University of South Carolina, who we're going to let you hear a clip from. The selection of Dr. Boutte was done with a lot of homework. When we made the decision to engage in this process this year, we reached out to stakeholders across the country, including a former U.S. Secretary of Education, and we got input. I will stack Dr. Boutte's resume against any recommendation that was given to this district. She has been published in over 87 different journals and books. She is a Carolina Distinguished Fellow. She is the founder of the statewide Center of Excellence for Education and Equity of African American Students and received approximately $1.7 million in research grants. So we asked her to explain to you exactly what she's working with our teachers on.
Cultural relevant pedagogy is what we're talking about. It is just a way of teaching that tries to ensure that students are going to be successful. So it has three components. One is to ensure academic achievement, and you do that by the content that needs to be taught. You try to make sure that you start with where the students are, with the assets they bring, their language, their culture, their home, and you use that as a bridge to teach whatever you're trying to teach. It has a component of cultural competence, and cultural competence means that you have to help students know their culture so that they should see themselves reflected in the classroom curriculum, in the imagery in the classroom, in the symbols in the classroom. They should be affirmed. They should be honored. But they should also learn about other cultural groups outside their own. And then the last part of cultural relevant pedagogy is to teach them how to be critically conscious, to teach them how to ask questions, to teach them to be an active participant in their learning. And so that's the part for students. But another part that's just as important is for the teachers. So teachers also are doing the same kinds of things as well. They have to know their own cultural group, who they are, how they think, what they value, and the role that plays in teaching and learning as well.
So our second question is, what are our teachers doing with Dr. Boutte? They're engaged in a year-long study of culturally relevant teaching practices that involves 2 meetings per month, once in person, once online. And the reason we went in person and online is I did a needs assessment with teachers in the fall to ask what kind of professional learning format do you want from district-provided PD? And 42% of teachers, a plurality, indicated a blended format. So this is exactly what our teachers were asking for. In addition to the 15 total sessions that our teachers will do with Dr. Boutte, they will be going on a capstone field study experience at the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. in June. This is a cohort model with 1 representative per school. We asked principals at each school to identify a teacher leader at their school to participate. We think this is consistent with best practices in learning in terms of the size that an individual like Dr. Boutte can work with at one time. It allows for collaborative practice among our teachers. And it provides a teacher leader, a thought leader at each school that can help further this work so that we can drive change from within and not just change from above. We went with a year-long format because this is consistent with best practices in professional learning. A framework for effective supports for educators developed at the U.S. Department of Education in 2016 has 7 key indicators of effective supports. Our approach is hitting 5 of those 7, including being sustained and ongoing over a period of time. But to best let you hear exactly what our teachers are doing, we asked them. So here's a video of what some of our teachers are doing.
The University of South Carolina and Richland 2 have partnered to create a culturally relevant cohort for Richland 2 that helps us understand how to teach in a culturally relevant way to our students.
When I come into my classroom and I have African American boys, I have Caucasian boys, I have Caucasian females, I have a Chinese male, I have to figure out how I'm going to take all these students and make sure that they have a successful year by being respectful of their values and their cultures while still making sure that they are learning the skills that I'm expected to teach.
It is looking at how to infuse culture, looking at students' backgrounds and what they're bringing from their home life and how to use that to teach them within the school day.
Dr. Boute's class has really helped in allowing us to kind of think a little bit differently than the ways that we maybe traditionally have thought. I guess accepting those things that we are saying that we may not necessarily have thought that they were things that may have been offensive or things that we were leaving out. So it kind of allows us to, look at that perspective of making sure that every student is on an individual basis, that we're not grouping them and we're acknowledging where they come from and the things that they deal with and all of those things when we're preparing lessons and just the overall conversation when they enter your room or when you see them in the hallway.
I'm always asking myself, is every student being included? And also just answering the question of who, what, where, why, how do I teach? I think if we constantly reflect and analyze our teaching, and teachers get so busy oftentimes that we don't do enough of that. So it's really helped me to reflect on what I'm doing in terms of trying to reach all groups of students, regardless of ethnicity, gender, that kind of thing.
Before this, I never really thought about what my books represents to my students. But then looking through my books and asking myself, do my books represent all of my students, and what are the messages that my actual curriculum is sending to the students? Can they see themselves in the curriculum? Are they comfortable with the curriculum? Is it teaching them anything outside of social studies that they can apply to their life?
One of the biggest things for me has been my understanding of how those inherent biases, even as conscious as I am and try to be about them, I still have them. They're still embedded in me. And it's not because I'm not trying, it's because I'm not aware. And so I have to work harder to be more aware so that I can combat those biases.
I recently helped one of my teachers at my school. She was having some issues, and at first I was a little hesitant because I'm a new teacher, second year, and I was like, well, she's a Caucasian lady. I'm like, I don't want to. And she had a predominantly black class. She has a predominantly black class. So in my head, first I'm like, okay, I don't want her to think that I'm coming in because she has a predominantly black class and I'm that black teacher. I don't want that, because I want to go in to help her be an effective teacher that I know she is, and that I can help her with any situation that she's having. So one thing I did was I learned from here is just to have the conversation. Just simply have a conversation.
And then the third question that we ask is, how is the cohort making an impact in our classrooms, even though they are not fully done with the course yet? We already know from research that these strategies have a positive impact when culturally relevant strategies are actually used, but let's hear more about what the teachers say the impact is.
We visited the classroom of 4 Richland 2 teachers to talk about cultural relevant pedagogy. Florence Scott is an 8th grade ELA teacher.
We have a disproportionate number of white teachers to our primarily African American student body. And a lot of our teachers are coming from areas that aren't as diverse as South Carolina.
Scott has a definitive mindset on the need for cultural relevant teaching.
It's at the core of what we need to be doing. We need to be recognizing that each of our children comes to school with their own cultural ideals based on their family's background and their family's history. And when we try to fit them into a one-size-fits-all education system, we diminish what they bring to the table, the uniqueness that is each of our kids.
One of the things that some people may think is cultural relevant teaching is just for black students, or only white teachers need to be trained in it, when actually, because we are a multitude of backgrounds, I myself, even though I'm an African-American female, I can't relate to every African-American student because they have a different background. Just because we're both African-American doesn't mean that I know them or I can relate to them. Other things like gender and socioeconomic class also comes into factor.
Sadiqa Cruz is a 7th grade social studies teacher. Cruz overcomes the background differences by opening up a line of communications with her students, giving them a chance to get to know her, and in the process, letting them talk so that she gets a chance to know them.
So by getting to know your students, by understanding them and giving them that platform to express their thoughts and their feelings, that can help us better understand them, which in turn can help us better teach them.
Sometimes, it can be all about perception. I would like to think that most teachers, I think, are in the profession because they want to help all students. I do think that sometimes miscommunications or bad perceptions, whatever you want to call it, can cause problems and set up barriers.
Jeff O'Shields is an environmental studies and chemistry teacher. O'Shields notes it's not just students who set up barriers. Many adults get set in their ways, and change may be a challenge.
But there's some folks who just kind of, they'll see an issue and say, well, this was never a problem. I never perceived this as a problem before, and they don't know why it's an issue or a problem. So I think that a class like this, we have the opportunity to address those kinds of things and not be afraid to ask questions.
One of our recent classes was very, very eye-opening in terms of the types of languages, the African-American language, so we kind of talked about examples where one person may say straight and another person may say scrate, and all of these different things. I knew that there was a difference. I knew that a lot of times we referenced it as slang, and Dr. Boutte is saying, this isn't slang, this is a type of a language. And so it was kind of that aha moment for me where when we hear students say things, we automatically try to correct them. And so we've learned that it's not a matter of correcting, but a matter of translation. So you and your partner are going to provide positive feedback to each other.
Monique Flowers is a middle school magnet teacher. That simple understanding of language will become a new tool in her teaching arsenal.
One of the questions that I know moving forward that I will definitely ask when a student says something is, what's another way? How else could you say that? What's another way to say that versus saying that's wrong or that's incorrect English? And so she talked about standard English or Mexican American language or African American language as it pertains to those things.
4 teacher representatives, each with a sort of case example of what they and others are learning. Yet they have barely scratched the surface of the complex topic of cultural relevant pedagogy. Richland School District 2 is committed to the professional development that will close the gap between teaching and learning. Dr. Boutte's knowledge of cultural relevant teaching has been a welcome boost to our teachers, exposed to her classes.
Because it's bringing them out of their comfort zone. And cultural relevant teaching is going to, when done right, is going to bring a teacher out of his or her comfort zone. But that risk is going to reap a lot of rewards.
We have to be open to learning from our kids and from their families and building those relationships that allow us to ask questions if we don't know something.
Our professor's very good about, she makes you feel comfortable. You don't feel like that if you ask a question, you're going to be attacked, or you don't have to be afraid to ask, hey, why would this not be an appropriate thing to do? Or so I think that, again, it's just a good forum where you're able to talk freely and maybe have some, if you do have a perception or misperception of something, you can ask, why is this wrong, or why would this be a problem to other groups of folks?
If we're going to move as a district, if we're going to close this widening achievement gap and catch some of these kids that are falling by the wayside, we're definitely going to have to look at things differently. We're definitely going to have to look at how to bridge home and school. And for me, in my classroom, I've seen that the answer to that is culturally relevant teaching. I want to start out by just giving you a definition of culturally relevant pedagogy, because sometimes it's confusing. People really don't understand exactly what it is. So it was coined by Gloria Latson-Billings, and she was our keynote
Cruz has been allowed to expose fellow staff members at her school, Blythewood Middle. If word of mouth is still great marketing, Boutte's classes has equipped our core teachers with a critical tool to move forward.
It's given me verbiage to talk to other teachers. It's giving me, these are all ideas that I've always carried, but I didn't have the vocabulary to communicate that effectively to the other teachers that aren't operating maliciously, but out of ignorance. And they need concrete ways to learn to be culturally relevant in their classrooms.
We thank you so much for your patience as we've tried to give you just a little bit of the richness of this coursework in this cohort that we have now. We're very excited about the work that they're doing and the work that they will continue to do, and we're happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Dr. Grant and Mr. Kelly, thank you for your presentation. I know that's a lot to encapsulate in a relatively short time period, but at this time we'll take questions or comments from board members. Dr. Elkins-Johnson.
Thank you so much. That was an awesome presentation. And I'm glad to see that we are working with with Dr. Boutte, because she's been trying to get in our district for many, many years just to do this. So I'm glad that we finally got her to be a part of Richland 2's family. My question is, do we have the funds to incorporate more teachers being able to be a part of this program next school year? Because I know this year is just a cohort. Do we have the funding to add more teachers each year and then actually get into the schools to make sure all of the teachers are trained in this? Because this is awesome. We're in the process of budget season now. And so we will be looking at a budget, and that is one of the priorities. I also would also recommend, if that is a board priority, that you share that with us as well, because we will build our budget based off of the priority of the board and where you would like to see some emphasis at. But that is a priority for professional development for our teachers in the district. Yes, ma'am. And then one other question. I noticed that we had a lot of the faculty and staff, but what I would have loved to have seen too is some of our principals, because some of our leaders can really utilize some of this information that was there. So I would love to see how we can incorporate having some of our principals or assistant principals to be a part of this.
Thank you, Dr. Elkins-Johnson. Dr. Holmes.
I am so glad to see this presentation. As everybody knows, when I came on this board, cultural competency is near and dear to my heart. Actually, it's my dissertation topic, so it's a near and dear thing to me. So I'm glad to see that the district is moving forward with this, because I know it can bridge the gap between academic achievement. Having said that, I like the model of the teacher training method, but I also think that more teachers and administrations who work with these minority cultures need to also be trained in this. And one other thing that dawned on me, the teachers that are in the cohort, I'm sure they have been given this multicultural teacher survey or some other instrument of that nature that aligns them and shows what particular biases you have individually. And I was wondering if if that was a possibility for those teachers that would like to take that in anonymity, so they don't feel pressure pressured by that. But it's a great survey because it reveals some biases that you don't know that you may necessarily have. And I wanted to know if we have the capability to make something like that instrument available through your office for teachers who would like to take that test to get a feel as to where they stand on that.
Thank you. I'm sure that we can do that. One of the things that I have found as I have worked with teachers, especially on the issue of implicit bias, is really important to have a conversation with them. If you take the test in isolation and you don't then follow up with, now that we've identified your biases, now what? You kind of leave people just dangling out there a little unsure about where they're going to go.
But wouldn't that be part of the cohort training? If you're using the teacher trainer model, won't they address that in one of their sessions when they talk to their particular constituents?
Are you asking about the cohort that we have going on now?
Right.
Sure. That kind of survey that you're talking about was something that the teachers going through the cohort experienced at the very beginning with Dr. Boutte. And as Dr. Grant just indicated, the key to that was Dr. Boutte unpackaged that with our teachers afterwards. We are still very much in the heart of this. They're only about halfway through. The last session that Dr. Boutte has on her schedule is titled Putting It All Together, Next Steps Planning for Sharing with Others. So she is gearing everything toward that. Right now, our teachers are neck deep in the learning of the content, and the sharing strategies will be moving toward. That is obviously a tool that a teacher could use, and so Dr. Boutte will be helping us unpackage how a teacher can take that home at the end.
I think that that's very important because as one of your teachers on the video indicated, cultural mismatch is a huge reality in the district. We're there. So we have to make sure that all teachers are going to be equipped to handle that cultural mismatch because no one has, these teachers have the right heart and you may not realize the biases that you have, but cultural mismatch is real and we have to make sure we bridge that. So that's like something I would really like for us to move forward into because as I said, you have the relationship part of cultural relevancy, but we've also got to make sure that we move into the academic part of how to teach culture relevant because it's not just the piece on the socialization aspect, but I want to make sure that we're also touching on the academic part so that there are key things that you do academically to move one particular group of minority students up academically.
Thank you, Dr. Holmes. Mr. Manning.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the cultural mismatch because I think conversely I have the question, so we heard the teacher who said students may use the word straight instead of straight, and I think there's a place for that, but then what happens when you have the parent who has a teacher who uses straight and a parent who is not okay with their student using straight because their culture says the word is straight? How do we deal with that reverse?
I think as a school district, our primary responsibility would be to ensure that our teachers within the classroom have the capacity to teach the students. We're always going to have parents who may and members who may have some concern or issues, and we would just have to address those on a case-by-case basis, and hopefully we can educate the parent or that individual on what's taking place. It would be very difficult for us to allocate resources to do the cultural relevant pedagogy in a deep dive with parents and community members, but we probably could do something on a more surface level just to expose them to what we're doing, what it means, what it looks like. So if they hear something like that, they at least have a frame of reference beforehand. And so they can then ask questions and maybe we can better assist them in understanding that may be a cultural, that may be connected to a particular culture.
So I'd also just like a little deeper dive. When we describe culture, it's interesting because I've asked myself this question, and this is a tough conversation, but what is white culture? And I think that's hard to define, right? I think we have an American culture. I'm not sure that I understand as a white person what my culture is. And so we talk about defining culture as a white teacher to understand the culture of other folks that come from diverse backgrounds, if I have an African American teacher who has a majority white class, how do we teach them what white culture is and how to identify that and teach to that?
And I think it is about learning about, it's about learning about the students. So what is the philosophy in your household towards education? How do you view education? What are your normal routines and habits? What kinds of things do you celebrate? What's important to you? What are the values that you're being taught? That's how I would look at the culture of the person. And then that extends out into other areas like what kind of religion you might be with or support, what celebrations that you have, and then how do those impact the work in school, so that you learn the value system for the student, then to meet that student where they are to help them to reach the achievement level that you're trying to accomplish.
Can I add one thing to that?
Yes.
I would add to that in a district like Richland 2, where we have 62 different languages spoken, there's no way we're ever going to be able to address every single possible scenario that a student brings into our classrooms, which is ultimately a core reason why we're taking a year-long deep dive approach to this, because to be effective, culturally relevant teaching can't be just about knowledge, although I agree with Dr. Holmes, there's certainly a knowledge base you need to have. It can't even just be about pedagogical skills. It has to be about a mindset.
Right.
I love the clip of Mr. Williams talking about the conversation he had with his colleague, the female teacher, where he says, we need to have a conversation. And ultimately, that's what this training is about, is equipping our teachers for how to have the conversations to bridge gaps in backgrounds between teacher and student, regardless of the race of the teacher or the race of the student. And that's why we've got to take a prolonged approach to this, because I can train you how to use Power Schools right now. I cannot train you how to shift a mindset and build a whole toolkit of having a conversation in one session.
Right. And I appreciate the idea of a mindset. That I buy into, right? A mindset, understand. I think the one teacher talked about that it was more than just race, that it was also gender, it's also age. I mean, because we all think very differently depending on age or exposure. I'm good with that. I'm just a little bit cautious sometimes when we take it into the pure minority versus non-minority discussion, because I think that makes it a very black and white sort of issue, when I think it's deeper than that, and I want to make sure that it's culturally relevant for all of our students and not just one part of the population within our schools.
So one example on that, Mr. Manning, is the last in-person session was about linguisticism. And in addition to looking at African American dialects or Hispanic American dialects, Dr. Boutte also spent time on Southern dialect. And we unpackaged things like y'all. And we came up with a great list of things that in the South, we know what bless your heart means. But you take that up north, they don't know what it means. And so Dr. Boutte is trying to help our teachers unpack exactly what you're getting at. She's looking at it from all possible angles, which is why we're blessed to have somebody who's such a recognized expert in this field.
Yeah, I would just recommendation that when we have presentations like this, we want to maybe bring some of that flavor into the presentation so that we're clear that it truly is about all of us. I think the Southern comment that you used, y'all versus whatever, I mean, to me, that helps to resonate a little bit better on what we're really trying to achieve.
If I could just add to Mr. Manning, I think we will definitely make sure that we try to give a more holistic representation of culture. Dr. Lansing Billings was at the University of South Carolina. A few of us attended that presentation. And one of the things that she talked about, that if she could do over, she would go back and add and put a lot more emphasis on the differences in age, because that generational gap is a big generational gap when it comes to culture. So today's culture of youth culture today is really different from youth culture from 20 or 30 years ago. And so a 50 or 60-year-old, even a 40, 47-year-old like myself, what I think about youth culture when I was 14 or 15 is totally different from what my students and students today see as youth culture. So she would go back and put a lot of emphasis on that. One of the things that she spoke specifically was the emergence of hip-hop culture and hip-hop ed as a vehicle to branch that. And a lot of young teachers, even today, regardless of what their ethnicity or race is, all kind of relate to hip-hop. and hip hop is a way to kind of bridge those cultural gaps. But in response to why the focus seems to be primarily on minority students or students of color, African American colors, it's because this district, as many districts and many students in public education in South Carolina, a vast majority of the students in our district, roughly 60% of our students are African American, and the vast majority, as the young lady stated in the piece, the vast majority of our teaching population are white females. And so that is not just a racial cultural gap, it's also a gender cultural gap as well. And so as we're addressing cultural relevant pedagogy and cultural relevant teaching, those are things that we have to continuously work to bridge. But in order to see the biggest impact, you're going to have to focus where you have the most discrepancy so that you can try to close that gap as well. It doesn't mean that we don't address the other parts of culture, like making sure that we are attuned to religion. Every African American student is not a Baptist. And so teachers can't go in and assume that because he's African American and he's black, he goes to a Baptist church. He actually might be Protestant or he might be Catholic. And so you make that assumption, and every African American student is not in poverty. So don't assume that because he's or she's black, she's in poverty. So you have to understand who your students are. And so I think that same goes for if you have a teacher that is white and they have a classroom of majority white students, don't assume that every student in that classroom comes from the same type of background that you come from. They may be Southerners. There are some who are single parent, may be coming from single parent homes. There may be some that may be coming from divorced homes. There may be some that are, you might think that they're from the United States, but they could be from another country. And so they have a whole different cultural gap that they need to close. So the onus is on understanding who your population is within your classroom, and then beginning the building process from there. And so it lends itself to that perspective, and that's why it's important to have such a diverse group of teachers participating in an activity like that, or in a cohort like this, because they're able to translate that, and hopefully as we continue to build capacity, because that's the challenge for us. How do we build capacity in an environment where we are losing teachers rapidly, where it's difficult to recruit teachers rapidly? So it's not just as simple as we want to make sure that we do that. We're going to be losing teachers who will be trained in culturally relevant pedagogy, and then we're going to have a crop that's going to be coming in that we're going to have to get trained. But as well, we have some that's here now, and so. It's going to take a very concerted and focused effort to be able to do that, in addition to finding the time to do the professional development now, because one of the things that we are pressed against is when do we find the appropriate time to give teachers professional development? One of the focuses, reducing the amount of time that we are encumbering on teachers to do things like PD so they can have planning time. So there's going to be a real challenge, not just when it comes to culturally relevant pedagogy, but when it comes to cognitive coaching, when it comes to discipline, when it comes to anything that we have to do when it comes to them and their content, helping them do computational thinking. There are multiple things that are competing. Our job as administration is going to be how can we merge those things and teach those things within the context that provide the PD within the context of the culturally relevant pedagogy, and that's why it's called.
And Dr. Day, I totally value this training, so I don't want to make it sound like that I don't. I do think it's very important, but I also want to be a little bit careful not to have our young white teachers feel that they're maligned, that because they're a young female white teacher that they will come into this district and be ineffective in a classroom, or that they don't understand. Maybe they don't, but we also have environments where we have maybe some African American teachers who may not understand where their white students come from and come in with biases as well. I mean, that can go both ways. I think it's valuable. I'm not going against it. I just think we need to understand that people need to understand it's deeper than just the race issue completely. I like your comment about the gender. We talked about Southern language and different things. I think that holistic approach, but also just want to be careful too, not to just not to have a certain group of our teachers that hear over and over that they're not effective because of their background, which they couldn't help, just like we can't, none of us can help that, right? And so I think it is important for us to understand each other and work on that. I just want to be a little bit careful about the messaging, not to drive those teachers away or make them feel like somehow they're less than because of where they grew up and the color of their skin. So that's all. Thank you.
Dr. Holmes.
Yes, two things. Because this is so important and it was a great presentation, and thank you, I'd really like to see this available on the web somewhere so that anybody can look at this. I think that that's important, that the people know that we take cultural competency very seriously and that we are making efforts to work in that area. So I'd like to see it on the web. And I also, additionally, on a personal note, I had asked previously, I would still like a list of the teachers who are the trainer models, because I would like to kind of just visit some of those rooms.
Yes, ma'am. I believe that list was provided in the last board meeting's board brief with the list of the teachers who were in the cohort.
I didn't see it. I'll go back and look.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And Dr. Davis, I'm sure will work with you for any teachers that you.
But I just want to say thank you for doing that. I appreciate that, and it was a very powerful presentation.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Holmes. And if any board members have any other questions or comments, they can follow up. Okay.
Just a quick comment to follow up to what Mr. Manning said. I understand where he's coming from, but I think that's the point of why we have this. And if we do have teachers that's coming in and inferior to this, then they really need this training.
Thank you, Dr. Grant. Mr. Kelly, we appreciate it.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry.
Mr. Shedd.
Thank you. It's a great presentation. I really appreciate you presenting so well on this subject. I'm glad that the administration responded to Dr. Holmes' request to have it placed in the agenda. I did not hear from y'all's presentation that you said that a teacher who may come into our district will be actually told that they are ineffective because they come with some implicit bias, or they come with, whatever baggage that they have, and they won't be effective in teaching. Did you all say that at all?
No, sir.
Okay. In fact, it sounded like you were talking about equipping folks so that they can be better teachers and they can have understanding of the population that are in front of them, and to get out of a comfort zone and to get uncomfortable so that teaching and learning, the gap will be closed, the achievement gap potentially will be closed, perhaps discipline, how someone views someone in terms of views a student in terms of their conduct, and maybe that may explain from a cultural standpoint. For example, an African-American male, and I know I'm now stereotyping, but an African-American male may get bored with what's going on in class and may speak loudly. A teacher, regardless of the color, may decide this child is being disruptive. Had they known that from a cultural standpoint, we express ourselves sometimes in an elevated voice, does not necessarily mean that we're angry. It does not necessarily mean that we want to disrupt the class. We just are more expressive than others. If there was an understanding of that and how to address it at that time, my hope is that that teacher will, based on that training, will ensure that that student continues learning while at the same time making sure that the rest of the class is not disruptive. Of course, we've talked countless times about ACEs. That's also a factor that must be taken into consideration. Dr. Davis talked a little bit about that as well. The cohort is a great start. And I do understand that resources are an issue. And I do understand it's also the teacher leaders. I think Mr. Kelly said that that was the next thing on the agenda, was to talk about the next steps. But I am concerned that we're going to have these teachers who are excellent. They've been trained for an entire year, gone through this twice a month, and we might lose some of them next school year, perhaps. To some other district, or they may just leave the profession, and then that school now doesn't have anyone who's been trained. And then I guess I'm just wondering, in terms of scaling and capacity, how long is this going to take? And with the professional development restraints that you have, how long is this going to take to make sure that all of our teachers, how many do we have? 4,000, 5,000?
I can tell you it'll never stop. It's never stopping. If the goal is all, then every year you're talking about 200 to 300 teachers possibly. So it never stops. It's ongoing, and that's what we're working. We're trying to build the foundation first before we launch a full implementation of making this a part of our culture and our culture and environment and our framework on our professional development. In addition to providing the other professional development that we have to provide for our teachers as well, it's going to be important that we continue to unpack standards and indicators of learning. It will do us no good for our teachers to be culturally relevant, have culturally relevant pedagogy, but don't understand content, and how to then take that culturally relevant training and implement it while teaching the content. We're going to have to continue to work on classroom management. We're also doing training when it comes to restorative justice and restorative practice. So we have to figure out a way to, one, focus, then merge those things together to create the framework, because this is new. This is all new for us. We're tackling this, but this is just the first leg of getting a group of teachers, 40 teachers, roughly 40 teachers trained by one of the best trainers that is around, and building the capacity for them. So we start with the foundation and we continue to build out, and we continue to go, we got to go outward and upward. And so that's going to be our challenge, but we are dedicated and we'll be focused on doing that. Like I said, that will be a priority when we do our budget. We'll look at professional development, what it's going to take, how many more can we add for the next year, what's going to be our framework from doing it, for ensuring that when people are onboarded into the district, that they are participating in something like this. But we haven't gotten there yet. We're going to see where we are at the end of this cohort.
Dr. Molly, I'd like to amend my budget priorities to include a lot of funding to that. Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Grant and Mr. Kelly. And I've got a couple of questions, but I know how to reach you later, just in the essence of time. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to item 11.8, Dr. Davis.
Madam Chair, members of the board, we have another report that we bring before you this evening on Gifted and Talented. We have Dr. Maria Kratsios, who will provide the report for you. Dr. Kratsios.
Good evening.
Mr. Davis, thank you. Thank you. And executive staff. Richland School District 2 has a long history of support for the gifted and talented dating back to 1972. All students are screened for the GT program eligibility, and we are very proud to serve 18% of our student body, 3 times the national participation percentage. We are the only district in South Carolina that serves second graders, and we're very appreciative to the board for making that available for our district. In the chart, we see fluctuation in participation percent among the elementary, middle, and high school. In the middle school, GPA is introduced as an additional qualification criterion, resulting in an increased participation on percent numerical shift. In high school, we see a reduce from middle school to high school. We keep in mind all students who are designated gifted and talented in elementary and on retain the gifted and talented status through the high school graduation. Now, for that, the participation change in high school is due to the large transient population shift in student body entering the high school. About 10% of our gifted and talented military students alone transferred out of our district from the 8th grade to 9th grade. Our GT programs reflect the diversity of our district with participation of all races and of all ethnic groups. This is a further evidence by participation of African American and Hispanics at double the national average and 50% greater than the South Carolina average. In the elementary school, our students are served by ALERT, Active Learning Experience Resourceful Thinking, and the ALERT prepares our students for success in middle, high, and beyond through a challenging curriculum, exposure to college and career possibilities, supported by a strong, active parent participation. Middle school, Richland School District 2, students have many options in addition to honors, magnets, and APs, and these options truly support the diverse career aspirations of all of our students. AP classes prepare students for college, teaching them specific content and testing their knowledge on national subject exams. I want you to pay attention in the Richland to non-gifted and talented students. The participation from year 16-17 to 17-18 increased almost by 50%. 699 that we have the students and 463 minus this divided by the 463. So this is a big deal. And then if we look at the Richland to all of our students, the scoring greater than 3, greater or equal to 3, this is close to our South Carolina average. This is a reliable measure of the success of our district's commitment and effort by Dr. Davis and his staff to increase academic rigor for all students. Now I want to celebrate the GT though. GT participation has remained very strong. The passing percentage rates has increased substantially by 11 points, 11 percent above the South Carolina and 10% above the national percentage. Now it's a celebration. SAT exams, both the SAT and the ACT provide measure of how students are likely to perform in the university level and beyond. And they are required part of the college admission process. We see the 11-point drop on the national level due in part to statistical anomalies of the test given in June of 2018, but does not affect reliability of the ranking. In the year when the national score dropped by 11 points and the South Carolina increased by 6, look at us who grow intelligence in our district. Our GT students increased their score by 27 points. ACT, SAT scores are from 400 to 1600 and with a 1200 points spread. The ACT from 1 to 36, there is a 36-point spread. If we normalize the SAT to the ACT to SAT scores, then the 0.3 improvement is equivalent to 10 points. We go further for the South Carolina, likewise, is equivalent to 13, and then for the national is equivalent to 7 points. So we're doing extremely well. Oops. The Greek philosopher and polymath Aristotle said, η εκπαίδευση είναι ένα στολίδι της ευημερίας και ένα καταφύγιο στις δυσκολίες της ζωής και αντιξότητες. In case you didn't get my accent, I wanted to emphasize that. As a parent of a son and a daughter who graduated for Richland School District 2, I thank the district for the education and the opportunities they have given my two children. I wear their successes as an ornament, and I proudly reflect on the achievements in the face of adversity. Thank you. And Madam Chair, honorable members of the board.
Thank you, Dr. Kratsios. We appreciate your deep dive presentation. This time we'll have any questions or comments from board members.
I have some questions.
Mrs. Agostini.
Thank you so much for your presentation. One of the questions that I have goes back to your slides with the ACT and the SAT scores. Those are gifted and talented kids compared to the national and state average. Is that correct?
Oh, that's correct.
Okay. Can we get copies of those slides?
Absolutely. You have it in your report or not?
I just have a...
Oh, there's a... Okay, absolutely. I can share them.
All right. And I do have a few more questions. I was contacted by a constituent who's very interested in this topic. Are there the same number or percentage of talented and gifted students at each school?
Of course not, because the constitution of the school is different. But all the students go through the same eligibility rules, and it's fair, is according to the state mandated regulations of aptitude achievement and performance task. So when you're tested and you're attended.
So thank you. Is there additional money that's tagged on to each talented and gifted student, and how is that distributed to the schools?
It is some money from the state. This is a department for Dr. Miley. I would like to step on his toes, but it's very equally distributed throughout our district.
Are we able to track how many talented and gifted students have left the district in the last 3 years? I know you talked about that transition.
Just because it was intriguing to me to see from the middle to high, and I started looking at the transient population, and I was surprised to see that. Mostly we see them as our transient population either leaving the state or moving to more exciting things.
Okay, and my final question, are there any special considerations for talented and gifted students' request for special accommodations to go to a different school, one that they're not zoned in the district?
No.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This is Mr. Riley. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for Dr. Kratsios?
I want to just thank staff for the report. I think, we've gotten some feedback that maybe the district isn't paying attention to gifted and talented. I think the numbers speak for themselves, that we still have a robust program in place in our schools, and that we're making a lot of progress, and that we are actually moving students into some of the gifted and talented range that maybe weren't there before. And so I think that's all exciting news and statistics and data showing that we're making great progress. So thank you.
Just as one of the things, just as, again, a point of privilege, if you don't mind, Madam Chair, to take a look at, as Dr. Kratsios shared, students are identified as gifted and talented as early as second grade. And so we're not talking about, the percent at specific schools. They are enrolled in their second grade schools based on the way they choose to live. And so they're identified as gifted and talented. The same criteria is used for all students to be identified as gifted and talented, which makes the system fair and equitable. And so all resources are deployed to the gifted and talented. One of the best things about that is having the alert program, because it does allow those students at the elementary level who've been identified as gifted and talented to come together from within their schools to work as alert students, and then also take on field trips and other excursions and opportunities across the district. So alert students get to interact with other alert students at schools from across the district. We also then offer the opportunity for students to apply to middle school magnet programs, which is criterion-based. We have one of the most robust and rich choice options in South Carolina, if not all of the nation. And students have an opportunity to apply to go to particular schools based on their ability levels as well as their interest levels. And again, this follows them into high school. One of the things that I think is a true indication of our district's effort, and Dr. Kratsios touched on it, is the district's effort to ensure that the students who may not necessarily have been tagged as GT in 2nd, 3rd, or 4th grade, but are strong students and students who work diligently to be their very best, and the number of students who are taking AP courses. She showed a slide of almost an additional 1,000 students took an AP test that are not GT students. And traditionally, you see your GT students in other parts of the state and maybe other school districts where your AP students are the ones, are typically your GT kids as well, your GT students as well. We wanted to push our students to take those rigorous courses because even a part of the NIMSI grant helps us do that. But we learned of the power of a 2. Although the qualifying score to get a credit is a 3, and many of us can attest that doesn't really matter now. You can get a 3, 4, or 5, most depending on what institution you decide to go to. That doesn't count for a credit anymore either. But the power of a 2, those students who take AP courses and score 2 are still outperforming their colleagues who never took an AP course in high school when they get to college. The research shows that their GPA and their completion rates are better, and that's why we're pushing those students to take those most rigorous courses that they're able to take to better prepare them for the rigors of college. And we see that being replicated across our district, and I think that is bearing fruit on the success of our students. It helps us create an equitable learning experience so that we can really believe that every school is an excellent choice. So we try to build those rigorous programs at all of our middle schools and high schools.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. If there are no other questions or comments. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Shad.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Dr. Davis, if you would, I know you, in your former life, when you were a high school principal, you sort of, and we've kind of seen the fruits of it now, but you would, if you could just share a little bit, just a little bit of the efforts that you made in order to encourage students who are non-GT and get them to go into more rigor, such as the AP courses, and a little bit of pushback that you got from their parents, since we're talking about changing mindsets, if you don't mind.
Well, there was a philosophy statement that we don't prepare the road for the child, you prepare the child for the road. And so my thought was that to use the AP potential list that came from PSAT and identifying those students who qualify or score on the PSAT to take AP courses, I would meet with those students in a group and then individually and then sign them up for an AP course based on that. And then their parents had to come and meet with me to sign them out. And so they were automatically defaulted into an AP class. And then the parent had to sign them out. And there was some pushback, but I was able to convince many of those parents to continue to at least try the course. And typically the courses were in areas that the students had a great interest in. I wasn't so concerned with the content, but more necessarily whether it's math or science. It could be AP photography. It could be AP art. It didn't really matter to me because the critical thinking pieces that AP requires is what I was trying to attempt the students to tackle and not to be concentrated so much on solely making an A in a course if it's a CP class versus making a B in an AP course, because the students will be better prepared for taking on more rigorous courses as they matriculate through high school and enter college or technical school or even the military work. Some of the most difficult things to read is a technical manual. And that's more rigorous than a textbook. If you ever had to read a manual, that's why most of us never learn how to program a VCR. I'm dating myself now, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. Without any other questions or comments from board members, thank you, Dr. Kratsios. We appreciate your presentation. Moving along to item 12.1, agenda items for March 12th, 2019. Dr. Davis.
Madam Chair, you have before you in the content area of your board docs the agenda items for the March 12th, 2019 regular schedule business meeting. Call to order. Executive session items, student appeals, student admissions request to adult ed, inspirational moment, special recognitions, approval of current agenda, special recognitions, approval of consent agenda, approval of minutes from the previous meeting, employment recommendations, releases, and in-district transfers. We'll have a school focus from Longleaf Middle. Public participation 1, we'll have legislative update. Our voting on executive session items, we'll have our student appeals in that section, our student admission requests. We have a hold for old business, no action requested for new agenda items, if there be any. We'll have old business action requested. We'll have approval of policies FA, FB, FEE, and FF. Those are the policies that we propose to you tonight, On the new business action requested, we had the authorization of the for capital improvement. For new business, no action requested. We have the policy revisions that we'll be bringing before you. These will be the new policies: ADF, wellness, EFE, competitive food sales and vending machines, policy revisions EEAG, student transportation and private vehicles, and then agenda items for the March 26, 2019, and then approval of those agenda items, public participation 2, board superintendent comments, public session, if a second public session, should there be one, a second executive session, should there be one, and then adjournment. You may note that we have reduced the number of reports in the next board meeting to try to be a little bit more brief, since we've had the last 2 board meetings have been somewhat long, so we've tried to reduce that for the reports. But should there be a request for reports, we'll do our best to accommodate those for this upcoming board meeting.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. Item 13.1, is there a motion to approve the agenda items for March 12th, 2019?
Motion to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Manning. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Shad. Any discussion with regard? The motion's been moved and properly seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we will electronically cast our votes at this time as we call for the question. Everyone have a pop-up? By a vote of 7-0, the motion carries. At this time, we have reached item 14. It is the second opportunity for public participation, and actually, we have 2 persons who signed up at the initial, before the meeting, to speak, to address the board, but we didn't have their public participation form, so those persons have provided their forms, and we are happy to have you address the board at this time. The first of whom is Jean Blackburn. And bless you for your patience.
Dr. Davis, Madam Chair, and members of the board, thank you for accommodating me this evening. My name is Jean Blackburn, and I am a proud educator in our district. I'm also a member of SC for Ed as well. I stand before you this evening as someone who is a statistical leaver, as I did not make it to the 5th year in the classroom. To give some brief context, I'm a product of Lexington 1, which is also where I started my teaching career shortly after graduating from college. I found my position to be vastly rewarding. However, in an effort to do right by my students, I burned the candle from both ends and consequently ended up leaving after my 4th year with no intention of returning. I spent the next few years pursuing interest outside of education. During this time, some friends of mine who were teaching in Richland 2 were rather obnoxious about how great this other school district in the Midlands was. To my advantage, their persistent remarks paid off as I agreed to return to my first love under the condition that it not be in the regular classroom. I was able to secure the very position I sought the following summer, and I have not looked back. This is my 8th year in the district, and I have no hesitation in asserting that I love what I do. Not in a happy-go-lucky, smile-all-the-time way, but on a deep, visceral level, I have joy. It is relatively well known that our nation has been experiencing a teacher shortage in varying degrees. As for South Carolina, in the last 5 years alone, the number of completers in teacher education programs has consistently declined, while the number of teachers leaving the field has significantly increased. And in my estimation, that is the textbook definition of a crisis. As a former leaver who is in a slightly unique position to offer insight on the crisis we're facing, I will say unequivocally and without reservation, the number one asset in education, and for us specifically in Richland 2, the number one resource we have at our disposal into contributing to the success of our students is not this amazing facility. It's not the schools we build, the cutting edge technology we have, the remarkable programs we offer. It is us, your teachers. And as you may be aware, Lexington 1 recently passed a resolution in support of the educators in their district. So tonight, on behalf of SE for Ed, and as members of the premier district in the Midlands, of which I agree, we humbly ask you to consider endorsing a similar statement in support of the teachers in Richland 2. We are convinced it would be a measure of good faith on your part, communicating to us how much our efforts are valued during this pivotal era of educational reform in our state.
I'm going to have to stop you. It's been 3 minutes, and I hate to cut you off, but I'm trying to be consistent. If there is anything that you want to share with us that you didn't get to share, feel free to share it with us in writing, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Steve Nussum. Are you still here? Okay.
Good evening. I'm going to be really brief because I have to be at school in 9 hours.
I know.
Basically, I'd like to second that I think it would be great. I had the privilege of being super sick, but being able for that reason to be at a Senate Ethics Committee hearing last week or the week before. And the members of the board that were there from various school districts, I think they really had a profound impact on the thinking of the legislators. My experience has been that I think they want to help, but they don't necessarily understand how the educational process works. They've offered this big bill that's an attempt to fix things. They think it's helpful to say things like, let's let school districts hire 25% uncertified teachers, and that's going to make more highly qualified teachers go into the districts. We don't really think that that's going to work, but I really think their heart's often in the right place and they just need education. So I think they've heard a lot from teachers. There were over 400 of us at the subcommittee meeting a few weeks ago, and hearing more from districts is really, really important. And I had a bunch of other things to say, but I think that's the main thing, that hearing from you guys, it really makes a huge difference. And I also appreciate Dr. Davis talking about AP Art history and the critical thinking skills, because my wife teaches AP Art history, and I feel like that goes unrecognized sometimes, but it really does help students to have a broad, encompassing education. It makes them better people, even if they don't get college credit. So I think that's great. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. We're now at item 15, board and superintendent comments, specifically item 15.1. Mr. Shad.
Thank you. I wanted to thank Dr. Grant for the inspirational moment, and congratulations to the 2019 Black History honorees, of which Dr. Boutte was one. We had the event last night. It was an excellent event highlighting the accomplishments of our rich history, of the American history, and a very big part of it is the African-American experience. I also want to congratulate Dr. Elkins Johnson on achieving the highest level in terms of board training. So kudos to you on that. You give us something to strive for. Wonderful presentations by everyone. I appreciate everybody's comments tonight. And I just want to underscore what was said just most recently. Teaching is truly a profession. We must treat it as such. And I hope that globally, from a state's perspective, that we do that and give us tools and resources to make sure that that occurs. It's not only salary, it's also taking care of the classroom, supporting our teachers, making sure that we can put them in the best position to teach the end user, as Madam Chair calls them, and that would be our students. If we are truly focused on students, then we have to do it through our teachers. And that's the only way that we can stop the outflow. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Shad. Mrs. Agostini.
First, I want to say thank you so much to SC for Ed for your commitment and your passion. Congratulations to Dr. Elkins Johnson for her recognition from the South Carolina School Boards Association. And then finally, I just want to thank all of those who take advantage of our public participation to address their concerns and share their thoughts. Since December 20th, I've received dozens of communications from members in the Richland 2 community upset with the board. I'm grateful for those who come forward to share their concerns and not just to leave them in our ears. Additionally, I want to encourage all of our community to take advantage of our public participation. I think you'll find it much more productive voicing your concerns here than voicing them on social media or just to one board member. Please share it with all. Thank you.
Dr. Elkins Johnson.
Just want to say thank you to all of you that presented tonight. It was great information, and we appreciate all that you do. Have a blessed night.
Thank you, Dr. Elkins Johnson. Dr. Caution Parker.
I would like to thank Dr. Helen Grant for her comments during our moment of inspiration. Appreciate it very much. And also for the great presentations we had this evening, and appreciate the comments by SC Fred. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Caution Parker. Mr. Manning.
I used all my airtime earlier. Y'all have a great evening. Thank you.
Dr. Holmes.
Thank you, SC for Ed, for doing your presentation tonight. There are board members who have talked individually with people, but I do like the idea of a collective. I think that was a powerful thing for you all to say. Also, I'd like to thank everybody who presented tonight. I'm going to mess up your name, Gutierrez, is that close? Goutte, Dr. Goutte, for her presentation on gifted and talent, also the cultural competency piece, that was wonderful. And also, I'd like to say this, I think it's valuable that we have such success stories being told right now. I also think it's valuable that we have generations of people who have gone through our schools and continue to go through our schools. I myself am a product of Richland District 2, and so I know that this is a premier district. Every district has work that needs to be done, that we're not the only ones who have to work on a district. But we are a great district, and the numbers and the commitment of the staff and everybody who works here, the teachers, faculty, staff, everybody, is indicative of what we can do in Richland District 2. And I'm so proud, so very proud to serve this district, a district that I grew up in also. And anything that I can personally ever do for you and help you as a board and as a collective, we're here for you. And you all have a great evening.
Dr. Kratzios.
Thank you, Dr. Holmes.
Oh, what's my
Kratzios.
Kratios. Kratios.
There we go. Close enough.
I'm going to work on it.
Thank you for your effort, Dr. Holmes. Dr. Davis.
I want to start out by saying thank you to the board for your continued leadership as we continue to move the district forward. I also want to say thank you to our staff, our executive team, our teachers, administrators, our students, everyone who's continuing to push forward. We're beginning the last stretch of school, and so it's really important as we come back from spring break to focus on that last piece of the year. But I do want to say thank you to all those individuals for all their hard work, and every day they're doing their very best to ensure that our students are receiving a premier educational experience in Richland 2. In addition to that, I want to share that Richland 2 is hosting a small and minority business showcase. It's going to be Wednesday, March 27th from 1 to 5 here at R2I2. It's a $25 non-refundable registration fee for businesses. It's free to the general public, and you can register online by March 15th. Attention to all the realtors selling houses in our district. We invite you to join us for our annual Sold on Richland 2 Realtors Breakfast. You will walk away with great information to share with your home buyers. For more information, you can call our Executive Director for Strategic Partnerships at 803-787-1910. Parents of future students, make sure you visit the website to find out about the 4K application process going on now through April 5th. Our Center for Child Development is holding information sessions this month and next month to help parents with the application process. Visit richland2.org for more information. And lastly, last night, Richland 2 celebrated our Black History Month honorees. This is our second celebration, so the second annual celebration, with a reception and program that features students, local exhibitors, and performers. performers. And thank you to all of the schools and centers for your tributes to Black history. Have a great remainder of your week.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. The good thing about going last is I can just say ditto and echo my previous board member sentiments, but I wanted to say something. Commander Beagle, who was one of our recipients at the Black History Month program last night, tweeted something today as he was thanking Richland 2 and Dr. Grant and that team for the award. He said, if education isn't a priority, then neither is our future. Something to think about. I'm thankful that our students' education is our priority. As board members, we are policy setters. We support our superintendent, who supports executive staff, who support administrators, who support teachers, who ultimately are our greatest asset, indeed, and impact our end user, our students. So I'm thankful for that. Dr. Grant, I thank you for the one comment. When you know your why, your what has more purpose. I'll have to remember that. I'm thankful for our district. I know this weekend we went to a school board association conference, and we have opportunities at that time to talk to board members from all over the place. And there are people who are struggling in major ways, struggling with resources, struggling with engagement and, teacher retention, worse than some of our issues. So I'm thankful that District 2 is premier. I'm thankful for our leadership. House Bill House Bill 3759. Please pay attention to it. Read it. I know there are lots of resources online. If you're not familiar, or you can go to scstatehouse.net and you can find the actual bill in its totality. It's 84 pages, but there are lots of, I know Dr. Davis has provided us with cliff notes for that, and we appreciate that, but please pay attention to that. Please pay attention to that. And just in the spirit of being grateful, Dr. Davis, Will Anderson, Keith Price, Dr. Miley, Mr. Manning, Tom Cramner with a partner from SLED, all presented at the South Carolina School Board Association this weekend and got, I know Dr. Miley's room, I think, was packed, and you darn near got a standing ovation, but we're thankful for the leaders of our district when they go and represent us publicly. It's amazing. They gave presentations that were certainly worthy of the national level, and we thank you all for that. I just wanted to give you your flowers while you're living. Dr. Grant, I thank you for opening us up on such a positive and inspirational note. Positive energy is infectious. We appreciate you for setting the tone at the onset of the meeting. I apologize that our meetings are gone late. I know there's some things that we're doing just to alleviate confusion, like, going through policies individually in case anyone has questions, where previously we would group them, and that allows people to ask questions if they have any. Some questions I've got to do a better job of asking in advance. We get most of our presentations in advance. I know that some things we do want to mention publicly, but if they're like clarifying questions, I'm trying to do a better job myself of asking those in advance to save us some time. But at the end of the day, everyone who's here, bless you. You don't have to be. You're here because you chose to be. We're thankful for your level of advocacy wherever you are. Those who have to be here, as I always say, thank you for showing up. Those who don't have to be here, bless you for being a part of this premier district and being engaging and supportive wherever you are. Can I get a motion to adjourn? Can we get a second? With no discussion, can we get a vote? Aye. That's fine.